It was the end of another grueling shift when reality tried to pull me in. My coworker invited me to her place for dinner, hinting she lived alone. I turned her down cold. I have a mission to complete, I told her. She would probably label me a loser or an outcast, but mortals like her could never comprehend. I have been grinding in the virtual abyss every single day for 10 years. Since childhood, I reigned supreme as the #1 player. No game could satisfy my hunger, until the developers handed me a beta key. It was the ultimate challenge, the hardest difficulty of my life. But 10 years later, as the final boss fell and the credits rolled, the void in my heart returned. That is when the glitch happened. I was pulled into the monitor, fading into darkness. When my eyes snapped open, an unfamiliar ceiling greeted me. And standing there was an old man, whose face triggered a memory I did not own. He identified me as Kaix Sheckchen, the heir of a fallen count. He claimed to have administered a supreme healing potion to ensure my survival. But the pain racking my body was the price of recovery. I feigned amnesia to gather intel and asked for his identity. The name was Russell. He was acting as the regent, holding the family together until the true successor could claim the throne. As soon as he exited the chamber, I dragged myself to the mirror. The reflection staring back was a stranger. And he was perfect. I was never this handsome in my past life. Golden hair, emerald eyes, and youth. Was it narcissism to be captivated by my own reflection, or just appreciating high-tier aesthetics? Suddenly, a blue, holographic interface manifested in the air. A system window. It was identical to the game I had mastered for 10 years. I could view every stat and piece of data. I accidentally grazed my chest and collapsed as agony exploded through my nerves. This was the fatal wound that had originally claimed this vessel. Or rather, it did kill the previous owner, since I am the pilot now. Who had the audacity to drive a blade into a noble's heart? As I calculated the variables, a knock echoed from the door. It was time to act. I had to perfectly emulate the original owner or risk exposure. A maid entered carrying a bowl of medicine. Immediately, I activated my analysis skill to check her status. Is she a useful NPC? To determine that I needed her name, she asked about my condition with feigned concern. Terrified of blowing my cover, I focused my gaze past her, locking onto the floating system interface. The girl's name was Laya, 23 years old. But the data revealed a glaring contradiction. Her allegiance belonged to a rival house, and her combat stats were dangerously high. Realization struck like lightning. This was no maid. She was an assassin sent to finish the job. The bowl she carried wasn't medicine. It was lethal poison. Her beauty was merely a trap to lower my guard. When I refused to drink, the concoction her insistence turned aggressive. Cornered, I pretended to take a sip and deliberately shattered the bowl. Instantly, the girl's money-lace demeanor shifted. Her movements became a blur of supernatural speed. She caught the falling cup before a drop could spill, commanding me to drink. My blood ran cold. This aura. She was a monster. If I resisted this, high-level assassin would simply slaughter me and vanish. I had to rely on my wits. I feigned a fainting spell, playing the part of the fragile, dying noble. The girl was too quick. She caught me, her voice devoid of warmth as she repeated her orders. Her eyes held the cold indifference of a killer, ready to eliminate a loose end. I had no choice. I swallowed the poison. The moment it went down, I screamed for Russell, creating an emergency situation. As she retreated, my body began to shut down. I tried to purge the toxin, but retching wasn't enough. Crawling on the floor, I spotted a hidden pot in the corner. Desperation took over. It contained spoiled milk. I forced the vile liquid down, triggering a violent reaction that made me puke, until consciousness faded. When I finally awoke, I knew I had cheated death. Russell was in a rage, seeing the young master collapsed in filth. I remained silent, the terror of that near-death encounter still lingering. But panic would not save me. To survive in this snake pit, I needed to level up my situation. I turned my gaze to the system window, visible only to me. Russell's stats were god tier. His loyalty was absolute, and his combat power was overwhelming. This was an NPC I could trust. I revealed everything: the assassin, posing as a maid, and the poison attempt. He listened, his expression hardening, and he did not question my words. However, logic dictated he needed evidence. Accusing the second wife's powerful faction of assassination without proof would be political suicide. The maid Laya was officially aid from the second family, mocking our financial ruin. The old knight believed me, but he was a man of honor who required certainty. So I proposed a plan, a gamble he could not refuse. 4 hours later, under the cloak of midnight, Laya moved like a phantom through the grounds of Sheckchen Castle. Despite her disguise, she noted the security had tripled, yet her elite training quickly exposed a blind spot. Slipping inside like smoke, she was shocked to find the corridor to Kaix's bedroom completely abandoned. Entering the room, she found her target lying still on the bed, just as predicted. He died painlessly, she thought, arrogantly confident in the potency of her toxins. Laya placed a forged suicide note on the desk, sealing it with Kaix's personal ring to finalize the deception. Mission complete. Now she only needed to melt back into the shadows. However, as she turned to escape, cold steel kissed her neck. The hunter had become the prey. Trapped, Laya desperately tried to negotiate. "Young master, please. He is already a corpse. Acceptance is your only choice, Russell. Unhand me this instant." The fate of the Sheckchen clan now rests with the only remaining heir, young master Grabine. Yet Russell stood like a mountain, unmoved by her venomous words. Laya pressed on, invoking his knight's vow. "Your loyalty belongs to the Sheckchen bloodline itself, not to a fallen lord." But suddenly a voice cut through the tension, startling the assassin. The dead man was speaking. "A slow, agonizing death makes for good theater, does it not?" he remarked, with a calm that chilled the air. "Poison, the favorite tool of cowards in noble disputes. I am familiar with the method. But your execution was sloppy. Do you comprehend the gravity of your failure? For an assassin, being unmasked is a fate worse than death." Cornered like a rat, Laya drew a concealed blade. She tore free from Russell's grip, lunging with killing intent straight for Kaix's throat. But her strike was laughably futile. Russell moved like a phantom, intercepting her with godlike speed. A single precise strike crushed her momentum, leaving her paralyzed with shock. Kaix observed the display, his mind racing. He understood the theory of the three-class power gap, but seeing the abyss between a knight and an assassin with his own eyes was a revelation. Shifting his gaze to the bass, "Defeated killer," he spoke. "Only an amateur leaves trails. Attempting to murder a noble carries a singular penalty, execution. Not even noble blood could save you from the headsman's axe now. The trap is sprung." Kaix smiled coldly. "I have the evidence you demanded, Russell, and a living witness to the treason." Crushed by the weight of her inescapable doom, Laya's spirit broke. Her eyes rolled back as darkness claimed her. Kaix raised a brow while Russell confirmed the collapse was genuine. The knight invoked his sensory arts. Kaix watched as monotendrils probed the assassin's core to measure her potential. "She possesses no cultivation technique," Russell reported, disappointed. "Barely the strength of an elite soldier. Standard bindings will suffice to hold her." Gazing at the young master's terrifying composure, Russell felt a chill. When he accepted this mission, he deemed it madness. But looking at the boy now, he had a distinct feeling the young master had orchestrated this entire play from the start. Shaking off the awe, Kaix issued his command. "Bind her. We have a long night ahead. I intend to peel away her secrets." Moments later, Laya was secured to a chair. While she drifted in the void, Kaix treated her injury with a high-grade potion. Slowly, the assassin's consciousness returned. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto the face of Kaix Sheckchen. The horror of her situation crashed down on her. She was a lamb before a wolf. After 6 hours, the respiratory system fails. Kaix lectured, his tone surgical. "Total cessation of life. A popular toxin for those seeking a gentle exit into the afterlife. Given my depressive history, the world would have called it suicide, a flawless narrative. However, if you were truly committed to the kill, you would have chosen a fast-acting venom and prepared to sacrifice your own life. Why did you hesitate at the threshold of death?" "What are you implying?" Laya stammered, mind reeling. "You cling to life," Kaix stated, piercing her soul. "Your conviction is too fragile to die for Countess Stella's ambition." He signaled his knight. "Russell, prepare the persuasion method. Make her understand her position." "What madness is this?" she screamed. Kaix stepped forward, revealing a sinister pill resting in his hand. "Recognize this." Before she could protest, Russell forced her jaws apart. Kaix dropped the pill into the abyss, washing it down with goat's milk. "Swallow." Laya gagged and thrashed, but the knight's grip was iron. The pill vanished into her system. Laya hyperventilated, terror in her eyes. "What did you do to me?" "With absolute indifference," Kaix replied. "You offered me poison. I am merely returning the courtesy." "Identify the toxin," she shrieked. "Cetus Marionette," the prince answered softly. The name struck her like a physical blow. "Impossible. How could a sheltered child acquire a legendary poison?" Laya roared in. "Denial." Kaix smirked, the expression of a devil. "Gold opens all doors, even for the primary catalyst, the white radish." The knight flinched at the ingredient's name. But Kaix's focus remained locked on the trembling girl. How do you possess such forbidden knowledge? She gasped. In a world bereft of the internet, he mused internally. Simply knowing the terminology placed him leagues above his primitive enemies. I offer you a path to survival, he announced. Report to your master. Tell them I am dead, Laya finished. For him. Why would I serve you? Because you desire breath in your lungs, Kaix whispered, leaning in close. That poison has over 3,000 antidote variants. One wrong move, and you rot. The specific formula to save you only resides in my mind. He stared into her soul, letting the ultimatum sink in. So gamble your only life or become my pawn. Choose. Broken and cornered, Laya slumped. I submit. Release me. Kaix shook his head. That is not how one begs for mercy. The assassin's killing aura vanished instantly, crushed into trembling submission as she pleaded for her freedom. This sudden collapse triggered Russell's instincts. Surely, this was a trap. But Kaix saw the truth written in her sweat. The curse of the spoiled goat's milk had finally claimed its victim. Russell, release her, the prince commanded. My lord, are you certain? The administrator hesitated. Laya is a crucial witness, Kaix sighed. I merely wish to preserve the last shreds of her dignity before disaster strikes. Russell remained confused until the prince whispered, Untie her now. Unless you want her to desecrate the floor right here. The moment the ropes fell, Laya bolted for the latrine like a demon was chasing her. Sometime later, she returned pale and humbled. With eyes fixed on the ground, she swore to return to her master and report the mission as a complete success. Watching her retreat, Kaix calculated his next move. To fool the mastermind, he needed a pawn, capable of commanding the knights. That power belonged solely to Russell. The administrator stepped forward, burning curiosity etched into his features. Young master. From where did you draw such terrifying wisdom? Kaix tested the waters with a smirk. Would you believe me if I said I found it all within the pages of a book? Russell scoffed at the notion. If such a dangerous tome existed, the author would have lost their head long ago. Furthermore, no forbidden texts exist within these walls. Realizing the simple lie had failed, Kaix shifted to a more mystical narrative. Do you recall the dagger that pierced my heart? Russell blinked. I do, but why speak of that tragedy now? That blade was a relic left by my mother, Kaix revealed. Legends say it holds an ancient power, one that flowed into my very soul when it tasted my blood. Russell still looked skeptical. Kaix knew he needed to raise the stakes. To unlock the seal of the dagger, I had to offer my own heart as a sacrifice. If true, the administrator mused, such a heaven-defying artifact would be legendary. Yet I know of no such weapon. Have you heard of the dagger of Kaix? Drop the name. Russell's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. The heirloom your mother left behind. It is the Kreia. If so, we stand before the greatest treasure in history. It all makes sense now. Kaix hit a sigh of relief. The bait had been taken. My lord, does anyone else know of this divine inheritance? Russell whispered. No. You are the only one, Kaix lied, smoothly pivoting back to the war at hand. Putting that aside, consider Laya's confession. She claimed my father Xian had his movements leaked. The official report said a warrior nearing the 7th class was slaughtered by beasts along with his escort. I never believed that fairy tale, Kaix spat. Russell fell into a heavy silence. As a soldier, politics were not his battlefield, yet the death of Lord Xian had always smelled of foul play. Without evidence, however, doubt was just doubt. What truly happened to my father? Kaix pressed his eyes, burning with blue fire. If it was murder, I will hunt down the culprit. And once I find them, I will rain destruction upon their house. Kaix named the Casala family as the prime suspects. Pointing the finger at the Countess and her son, he warned Russell, if Grambine seizes the title, my path to vengeance crumbles. He looked deep into the old knight's eyes. Do not yield, even if the darkness seems absolute. Loyalty to a family of kinslayers is no loyalty at all. Moved by the weight of these words, Russell bowed low, swearing eternal fealty to Kaix Sheckchen. He was casting aside 60 years of neutral doctrine for a new cause. A predatory smile touched the young master's lips. He had secured the support of a 6th-class warrior, the apex predator of the county. The reins of vengeance were now firmly in his hands, supported by the tiger, who had walked a solitary path until this day. Kaix feigned humility, stating, It is an honor to command such a blade, though I lack the strength to wield it properly. Russell, however, vowed with a flaring aura, Fear not, my lord. I shall forge you into a warrior who shakes the heavens. Returning to the present war, Kaix noted, the Countess used poison, a coward's weapon. But she left traces. This is the key to dismantling the enemy faction and beginning our retaliation. Russell nodded, ready for blood. How? Shall I serve? That was the trigger Kaix had been waiting for. The counter-offensive had begun. Meanwhile, tension suffocated the grand hall. Seated upon the Count's throne, the Countess gazed down at the gathered nobles. Everyone is present, she declared coldly. Whispers spread like wildfire through the room. Many wondered why she dared to sit on the seat of absolute power. The knights had been on high alert all night, fueling the dark rumors swirling through the castle. Finally, the Countess confirmed their fears. The rumors are true. Last night, the young master Kaix Sheckchen attempted to take his own life, seeking a cowardly end. One of the nobles gasped, questioning if had it been a common act, such a notorious toxin would never have been the weapon of choice. But if these rumors held weight, one had to assume the young master was already walking with the dead. With Kaix's imminent doom, the clan was destined to shatter, and the vultures were already circling, plotting alliances with rival houses. This chaos was the very nectar the Countess desired. With Kaix Sheckchen removed from the board, the path was clear. Her own bloodline would seize the throne, and she would ascend as the supreme regent. In the shadows, Kaix turned to his loyal blade. Is the stage set, Russell? The knight bowed, his eyes burning with resolve. I would follow my liege into the abyss itself. Their vengeance was finally at hand. Meanwhile, in the grand hall, the Countess stood ready to crown her son victory within her grasp. But destiny is a cruel mistress. The heavy doors groaned open, and Kaix Sheckchen strode in, shattering the silence. A ghost returning from the grave. The Countess's face twisted in disbelief. How could he still draw breath? Yet the young master advanced his presence, dominating the room, making her question her own sanity. Whispers erupted like wildfire. How was this impossible miracle standing before them? Kaix halted before the Countess, his gaze piercing. That throne, he stated coldly, is far too high for someone of your station. Forcing a mask of calm, she stammered, asking of his health. As it happens, I swallowed a lethal dose. Yet Kaix smirked. I purged the filth immediately. It seems the rat who poisoned me lacked patience. The air in the room froze. Are you pointing that finger at me? She hissed, her voice dripping with frost. You may reject me as your mother, but to slander me with attempted fratricide. That is a line you shall not cross. We stand in the sacred hall. Here every word carries the weight. Law. Kaix's smile didn't reach his eyes. Let us see if that arrogance holds when the darkness is brought to light. The Countess faltered, sensing a trap. What card could he possibly hold, sensing the moment was ripe? Kaix commanded the prisoner be dragged forth. Listen well, he bellowed. The witness shall speak the truth you hide. Most nobles saw only a stranger, but the Countess's blood ran cold. She knew Laya. Speak, Kaix commanded. State your true name. Laya lifted her head, and as she introduced herself, the Countess's mask began to crack, fury boiling beneath the surface. Before the gathered court, Laya unveiled her true nature, an elite operative of the Shadow Corps, a special Black Ops unit serving the Kasala bloodline. She detailed the organization's grim methods, recruiting orphans with high combat potential, forging them through hellish training in the Gorda Highlands. Only the demons who survived were selected, dispatched as sleeper agents under false skins. Her directive, she confessed, was to infiltrate this very sanctuary as Countess Stella's personal maid. A noble interrupted, demanding to know if the Countess was complicit in this deception. Laya's answer was swift and sharp. She knew everything. The accusation struck like a thunderclap, provoking an explosion of rage from Countess Stella. Lies. Absolute fabrication, she shrieked, claiming it was impossible for a spy to have lurked in her manor for 5 years undetected. She spun the narrative, accusing the prince of weaving a treacherous conspiracy to frame her, insisting that the Kasala family were her sworn allies incapable of betrayal. She sneered, declaring there was not a single shred of corroborating evidence. The tension was suffocating until a noble pointed a trembling finger at a silent giant in the corner. What of Sir Russell? The knight has said nothing. All eyes shifted to Russell, who finally broke his silence, his voice resonating like a judgment bell. This woman is no maid. She is a viper caught in the trap. I can verify every syllable she speaks, for I personally intercepted her blade as she sought to end Prince Kaix Sheckchen's life. He swept his gaze across the room, warning them to hear the full horror before passing judgment. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Laya continued, My primary directive was espionage. I reported to the Countess every moon. Under Kaix's interrogation, she revealed she had leaked the treasurer's ledgers. the late count's travel itineraries, and the shifting loyalties within the vassal families. But there was a darker purpose, a second final order. She was commanded to deceive Prince Kaix into consuming a slow-acting venom. Once weakened, she was to breach his sanctuary plant, a forged suicide note, and stage his death as a tragic surrender. Laya admitted the poison had been administered, but as she moved to finish the job, she walked straight into Russell's blade. Cornered like a beast, the Countess lunged at Laya, screaming of lack of proof. "You want evidence?" Kaix's voice dropped to absolute zero. "Then feast your eyes." He signaled his knight. Russell stepped into the light, unveiling the forged letter. "I caught the assassin red-handed in the prince's chambers." But the knight was not finished. In his other hand, he raised the Scroll of Earth's Memory, a legendary artifact that sent gasps through the crowd. Russell explained that this ancient scroll possessed the divine power to expose the malicious intent of any who touched it, projecting their sins as undeniable visions. "This arcane art shall illuminate the puppet master behind Laya's betrayal. The ugly truth will be laid bare for all the world to witness." As the words echoed, the color drained from an elder noble's face. A sinister realization took root in his mind. This secret could destroy them all, even if it meant silencing every breathing soul in this chamber. But Kaix, with the eyes of a hawk, caught the flicker of killing intent. With a sharp gesture, he unleashed his trap. The heavy doors groaned open. Ironclad soldiers flooded the hall like a steel tide, encircling the terrified guests and cutting off all hope of retreat. Indignant cries erupted but fell on deaf ears. The knight's blades obeyed only one master, the first prince. Trembling, the noble turned to the commander. "What is the meaning of this madness? I have glimpsed the abyss within these scrolls, and I was appalled." Russell declared, his voice like granite. "To prevent the inevitable storm of chaos, I took the liberty of summoning the Iron Guard into this sacred hall. This is treason, an attempted coup," the old man roared. Beside the Countess, young Grabine wept like a child. "Mother, what will become of us?" he whimpered. But the Countess felt the cold hand of doom upon her shoulder. The cavalry's presence confirmed her worst nightmare. Kaix held the ultimate trump card against her. There was no shadow left to hide in. Then Kaix twisted the knife. He reminded them of the ancient law regarding those who were one, spill their own kin's blood. For such treachery, Russell intoned, "The only sentence is the hangman's noose." In a moment of pure panic, Countess Stella shattered. "It was me, I alone bear this sin. My son is innocent. I acted of my own accord." She begged for Grabine's life with desperation in her eyes. But Kaix turned his cold gaze to the spy. "Lila, what do you have to say to this charade?" The girl's voice did not waver. The day the kill order was given, the young master stood right beside her. He is as guilty as the poison itself. Stella's world collapsed. "Lies. All lies," she screamed, clawing at the air. Kaix saw through her deception, but his heart remained ice. The vipers who sought his death would pay the ultimate price. The fox hunt had officially begun. The Countess would reap the whirlwind she had sown, and Kaix, standing victorious, would drink the sweet wine of revenge. He held her life in his palm, and she knew exactly what dark fate awaited her. But then, a sudden twist in the drama. Grabine defied his mother's plea for silence. The young prince marched toward Kaix and fell to his knees. The hall gasped at this shocking display of submission. Grabine cried out that he cared nothing for his own life, but begged his brother to spare his mother. The Countess, staring in horror at her son's sacrifice, commanded him to stand down. "Do not throw your life away." But among the nobles, the Mestadong act was viewed with disdain. While filial piety is noble, a prince must have dignity. To grovel in the dirt, it was a disgraceful stain on his honor. But Kaix, sharp as a razor, realized the battlefield had shifted. With one bow, Grabine was luff, painting him as the heartless tyrant. Was this a calculated move? A script written in advance? Fine. If he wants to play games, Kaix would destroy the board. "I shall grant your wish," he declared, with a wolfish smile. "Confession earns mercy in this court." He offered a devil's bargain. "Admit your crimes. Grabine and I shall petition the regent that the Countess's life be spared. But be warned," his voice dropped an octave. "Once spoken, words cannot be unsaid. Choose wisely." "What are you doing, Stella?" shrieked terror in her eyes. "It is a trap. Do not listen to him. Don't fall for Kaix's schemes." Her outbursts in the royal presence sent shockwaves through the crowd. An old lord gritted his teeth. They almost had the upper hand. But Stella's hysteria was ruining their gambit. She spat insults at the prince until Russell finally snapped. He ordered the Eurode. Soldiers to gag the woman. Grabin watched in agony as his mother was restrained. With the distraction. Dealt. With the stage belonged to Kaix, alone. Do you admit it? Did you both plot to poison my blood? With trembling lips, the young prince whispered, yes. Just as Kaix had predicted. The boy had no choice but to appeal to the court's pity to save his own skin. Despite his tender age, Grabin was a snake in the grass, orchestrating this tragedy from the shadows. Since you have confessed freely, Kaix announced smoothly, I shall seal the scroll of Earth's memory away. The family honor shall remain intact. Furthermore, he agreed to lighten the traitor's sentence. But to ensure you never challenge me again, Kaix delivered the death blow. I order you to destroy your own mana core. In the kingdom of Mana is the currency of power. It separates the gods from the insects. Without mana to strengthen the body, one is nothing. For this reason, destroying the core was a fate worse than death. Grabin froze. This was not in the script. He wavered on the precipice of destiny, trembling. Yet the grim truth remained. Refusal meant his mother's crimes would be unveiled, and she would face the hangman's noose. That tragic fate had to be averted no matter the price. Stella begged him to stop, screaming that a noble without power was nothing but a corpse, but her desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Honor your vow, Kaix commanded with a voice like steel. Russell presented the sealing scroll, ignoring the wailing mother, who clawed at the air to intervene. The artifact flared to life, binding Grabin's essence. The ritual was executed to perfection, and in a flash of light, his mana was stripped away. The procedure was absolute. Grabin's mana core was shattered and sealed for eternity, a sacrifice witnessed by the silent court. Countess Stella collapsed, watching the scene in horror, convinced. Her son's future had turned to ash. To her, Grabin was a fool who had thrown away his life without grasping the recorded, brutal nature of their world. Yet the young man smiled gently at his mother, wiping her tears as he confessed a shocking truth. The sword was never his path. His soul had always yearned to be an artist. But pure, unadulterated fury hijacked Stella's grief. She tore through her gag with maniacal strength, screaming a torrent of blood-curdling curses at Kaix, vowing that he would pay 1,000-fold for this humiliation. The prince, however, observed her rage with the cold eyes of a predator. Without his mana, Grabin was now toothless, barely stronger than a third-rate thug. With luck, he might rival Laya in strength. A flicker of unease pierced Kaix's chest, perhaps the ghost of guilt. No. He crushed the emotion instantly. This was merely a scenario in a grand game, and he was the player. Empathy was a weakness that led to game over. He had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back now. His resolve hardened. Kaix signaled Russell to execute the next phase. The acting administrator declared with booming authority that Countess Stella and her son Grabin were under house arrest in the annex until the Stuffer Dollar. Investigation into their treachery was complete. Total isolation was decreed. They were cut off from the world. The purge did not stop there. The hammer of justice swung toward the chief treasurer Gidris, accused of selling state secrets. In a heartbeat, he was stripped of his rank and shackled. Gidris attempted to scream his innocence, but his fate was already etched in stone. How dare filth touch a noble, he roared arrogantly at the guards, a foolish boast that earned him an immediate humiliating beatdown. Broken and dragged away like trash, the former treasurer vanished from the hall. A wave of terror washed over the nobles. They exchanged nervous glances, realizing that only yesterday Prince Kaix was a political ghost with zero support. Now, with the iron-fisted Administrator Russell at his right hand, the military bowed to his will. This alliance completely rewrote the rules of the succession war. Russell's calculated display of subservience was a silent threat to every lord in the room. Defy Prince Kaix, and you will be crushed. The cleansing continued. Russell confronted the guard captain, suspending him on the spot and ordering him into isolation to prevent any backroom dealings. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the crowd declaring that this catastrophe was solely due to his own incompetence. He bowed low, offering his resignation as penance. Kaix's eyes narrowed, recognizing him. Instantly. It was Gerd, an administrator famed for his unshakable competence and moral spine. Breaking a man like that would be wasteful. But the prince was 10 steps ahead. He had already read this move in the walkthrough. Russell rejected the resignation instead, thrusting a blacklist into Gerd's hands. It contained the names of every official suspected of corruption. The command was absolute: purge the traitors, but keep the county's heart beating. Kaix stepped in, his voice cutting through the tension. With only 4 treasurers clean, the entire department was under the microscope. New blood was needed immediately. Gerd, desperate, pleaded with the prince for mercy, begging him to spare the lesser offenders. He argued that purging the veterans would cause the entire financial system to collapse. But Kaix stood like an immovable mountain. To him, loyalty was the only currency that mattered. If he had to burn the department to the ground to rebuild it with loyalists, so be it. He proclaimed that pausing the investigation for fear of administrative lag was cowardice. Guards, excused that they simply bet on the wrong horse, did not sway the prince's cold logic. Kaix's ruthless tyranny sent a chill down Gaird's spine. The fragile, indecisive boy of the past was dead. In his place stood an activant, avatar of absolute dominion. The other nobles watched, trembling in their boots. If Russell was the sword and Gerd the shield, seeing both subjugated by the prince was a terrifying omen. Kaix inhaled the scent of their fear. The board was set, and finally all the pieces belonged to him, with the most powerful figures now dancing in the palm of his hand. The real game had finally begun. Kaix had once feared Gad would be a formidable obstacle. But looking at him now, he realized the truth. Men like that were pitifully predictable. With this insight, a ruthless plan began to take shape. He would purge the opposing faction entirely, crushing the neutral and the useless alike beneath his heel. It would be a brutal battle royale of loyalty. Only those left standing would prove their worth to serve him. The prince's cold, murderous aura suffocated the room. Terror seized their hearts. One wrong move meant death. To survive, they scrambled to bow and scrape, desperate to prove their obedience. They begged for Kaix's favor, like dogs. He watched them with hidden amusement, wearing a mask of icy indifference. From the shadows, Russell observed every move, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Later that night, the prince sought refuge in his chambers. Exhaustion weighed on him as he collapsed onto the bed. In the silence, memories of his past life drifted back. A life of mediocrity, average grades, average looks, just another faceless extra in the background. But he had clung to a desperate belief. If he could just conquer this game, he would finally be special. He would ascend above the masses. He would never be a nobody again. He had chased that hope to the end of the beta. But the ending brought only despair, forcing him back to a gray reality. But fate had dealt him a new hand. Reborn in this world, he had a second chance to seize glory. The divine throne called to him. He could feel it. The ultimate victory was finally within his grasp. A realization struck him like lightning. Perhaps his wish to enter the Aran continent hadn't just been a daydream. The system might have granted his desire, literally transmigrating his soul into the game itself. There was no turning back now. He had to see this through to the bitter end. Perhaps then the system would grant him a wish worthy of a god. How to clear the game remained a mystery. But for tonight, he cast his worries into the void and drifted into sleep. The next morning, Kaix awoke with a burning purpose. The question wasn't if but where to begin his conquest. He knew every corner of this virtual world. Yet the name Sheckchen County rang no bells in his memory. As he reached for a map, a holographic screen flashed before his eyes. System alert. The conquest of Aran was complete. His reward, a legendary treasure map exposing every hidden dungeon and ancient relic in the world. He was the first player to achieve this feat. The first to hold this god-tier item in his hands. With this knowledge, the path to absolute power lay open before him. Kaix checked the timeline. It was Imperial Year 289. The original heroes wouldn't begin their journey until the year 294. The truth hit him hard. He didn't remember Sheckchen County because it was destined to be destroyed before the main story even began. Russell's warning about money echoed in his mind. He checked the ledgers and the grim reality was confirmed. This territory was on the brink of collapse. But even facing a doomed land, he refused to surrender. The thought of looting the treasury and fleeing crossed his mind. He crushed it instantly. Money could be earned again. But this land was his legacy, and he would not abandon his birthright. Analyzing the books, he found tax revenue was normal. The military budget hadn't spiked. So where was the money going? Reviewing 10 years of financial data was a headache, but he found the rot. Trade with the desert kingdom of Madrosa and the plateau routes had been severed. The lifeblood of the economy was gone. Taking a loan was suicide. The annual interest alone was higher than an entire year's tax revenue. He slammed the books shut. He was done with numbers. He needed a shortcut. A memory surfaced from the depths of his game knowledge. There was a man in the dungeon, the perfect tool for this crisis. Determined, he marched toward the prison. He needed to squeeze some answers out of Gidris. The prison guard scrambled to salute. "Your Highness, to what do we owe this honor? Bring me to Gidris," Kaix commanded. The foul stench of decay and despair filled the air. "I never thought I'd see royalty in this filth," the guard muttered. Kaix studied the man. He was a creature of instinct, loyal only to whoever held the whip. It was the perfect chance to test his authority. This captain would bend the knee to power without hesitation. If innocent men rot in these cells, Kaix said, his voice smooth but dangerous, justice demands they get a second chance. The guard nodded vigorously, eager to please his new master. However, Kaix continued, we must look at every case, where the vilest scum were unleashed upon the world. From this moment forth, this heavy burden falls upon your shoulders. Without a single breath of hesitation, the guard bowed to the command. Kaix watched him with cold eyes. After serving the captain for an eternity, the man swayed so easily under a new master's shadow. A bitter realization struck Kaix. He had become the very monster he loathed. Just like the vipers playing politics in the capital. But introspection would have to wait. The dungeon called. As they descended into the gloom, Gidris's whining echoed off the damp walls. This slop is unfit for pigs. I will not rot in this filth another day. The prince stepped into the torchlight. Planning a grand exit, are we? Gidris sneered, clutching the iron bars. I knew you would come, my prince. His smile dripped with arrogance. Finally, here to settle your massive debt, aren't you? Or has the darkness rotted your mind to imagine such things? I owe you nothing but a grave. Your clock is ticking, old man. Gidris laughed, unfazed by the killing intent. I served as chief treasurer for over 20 years. I know why you are here. The mountain of debt crushing your territory. Kaix cut him off cold. You are treasurer no longer. Perhaps the old man hissed, but I hold the key to that financial abyss. The audacity ignited a spark of fury in the prince. Kaix didn't blink as he turned to the guard. Is there a torture specialist in this dungeon? Yes, my lord. Fetch him, now. Sensing the murderous intent in the air, the guard vanished instantly. Gidris froze. The smile died on his lips. He realized too late. This was no naive boy. Standing before him was the ruthless tyrant of Sheckchen County. With a torturer, en route his leverage was crumbling. I do not care how strong your will is, Kaix Sheckchen whispered, with a calm that chilled the bone. You will break, but entertain me. If your scream is pitiful enough, I might offer you mercy. Poison instead of the noose. The very poison used on me. Looking into those abyss-like eyes, Gidris knew he was staring at death itself. Terror seized him. Collapsing like a house of cards, Gidris groveled, begging for his miserable life, swearing to spill every secret to save the prince's gold. Running out of patience, Kaix commanded the trembling worm to speak. Gidris cracked. The debt. It's a fabrication, a forgery orchestrated with a man named Gerard Milsers. This viper managed the Cachelin family's treasury, using the scheme to embezzle the royal mining tax owed to the palace. According to the traitor, exposing Gerard would shatter the contract, freeing Sheckchen County from its shackles. But Kaix's expression remained icy. He saw the fatal flaw instantly. Fool. Gerard would simply sell the debt bond to a third party for pennies before the law arrived. Sheckchen's ruin would be sealed, not solved. Gidris stared, dumbfounded. The prince was 10 steps ahead. Before he could stammer a reply, the heavy door creaked open. A guard returned, dragging a man who smelled of dried blood. Sheckchen's finest executioner. A predatory grin curled Kaix's lips. Pure horror flooded Gidris's veins. Scrambling backward in a desperate bid to negotiate, the old rat squealed. Gerard, he manages a secret fund. At least 100,000 gold coins for the Cachelins, the plotter grows. Number didn't move, Kaix. Panic clawed at Gidris's throat as the silence stretched. With a voice trembling like a leaf in a storm, he cried out, I know where the vault is, Gerard's secret stash. Kaix scoffed, skepticism dripping from his voice. If it is truly secret, a lowly pawn like you would never know its location. Seeing the torturer unpacking his tools, the old man swore on his soul, screaming his honesty. The prince paused. One last chance. If you know where the gold lies, why are you poor? Gidris hesitated. The torturer grinned, reaching for his pliers. I'll start with the pinky. Terror shattered Gidris's mind. Desperate, the old fool confessed. I tried and failed. Kaix's eyes gleamed. You didn't go alone, did you, Gidris? Nodded frantically. He had hired a specialist, paid up front. And what was the price of this? Phantom thief, the prince demanded. 3,000 gold coins, Gidris sobbed. The sum was so ludicrous that Kaix realized the man wasn't just corrupt, he was an idiot. A sharp mocking laugh exploded through the frest, dungeon darkness. Kaix couldn't believe it. That is half the annual revenue of my entire territory. Money stolen directly from the people's blood and sweat, Gidris stammered, trying to justify his greed, claiming it was a necessary investment. It would have worked, but the key, it was a magical crystal sphere. Kaix's interest peaked. Speak. The old man explained that the thief had demanded 2,500 gold coins just to forge a replica. Kaix shook his head. You senile fool. You were played. That thief was working with Gerard from the start. It was a classic trap, yet despite the humiliation, Gidris swore the vault existed. I saw it. Gerard opened the earth with the sphere, pressed hard by. The prince's killing aura, he finally spilled the location. The Golden Plateau. Somewhere on the Golden Plateau, even with his vision sealed during the kidnapping, his instincts screamed the truth of his location. The clues were vague, but hardly impossible to decipher. To be absolutely certain, however, Kaix knew he needed to scour the area personally. He rifled through his memories, searching for anyone connected to the desolate Golden Plateau until a face surfaced. Laya, the orphan girl from that very wasteland, would be the ultimate pathfinder. With his strategy locked in, the prince turned his back on the dungeon. Wait, what about me? What happens to my fate? Gidris screamed in desperation. But the prince walked away, leaving the traitor's pleas to echo in the darkness. Outside, a cold fury burned within Kaix's chest. It wasn't just the theft that enraged him. It was the sheer incompetence Gidris had shown in being so easily played. And after himself, example had to be made. Shifting his gaze to the nervous guard beside him, Kaix demanded to know if the man had any intel. The tell her, guard denied it instantly, desperate to hide the bribe he had taken from Gidris to remain silent. Kaix's eyes narrowed as he set the trap, lying smoothly that Gidris had already spilled his guts while the guard was away. The man tried to maintain his innocence, but the prince cut him down with a sharp glare, declaring he wasn't a fool to be trifled with. Realizing he was cornered, the guard collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy and shoving all the blame onto Gidris. But when he finally lifted his trembling head, he found himself alone. The prince had vanished like a ghost. Aware that his life was now hanging by a thread, the guard decided he had to settle the score with the rat who sold him out. Little did the fool know he was dancing exactly to Kaix's tune. From the safety of the shadows, Kaix watched his puppet move to strike. Suddenly, a chilling pressure assaulted him from behind. A murderous aura enveloped the air, sending a shiver of primal dread down his spine. On high alert, Kaix demanded the identity of the stalker, lurking in the darkness. A man stepped forth, introducing himself as Kraut, Salem, and the prince. Instantly sensed a monstrous power radiating from him, perplexed that such a powerhouse had no reputation. Upon opening his status window, Kaix saw the terrifying truth. Kraut was on the verge of hitting level 100, a milestone that placed him among the supreme apex warriors of the entire continent. Moreover, possessing a combat class of that caliber was a 1 in a million rarity. A dark hypothesis formed in Kaix's mind. Could this man be the Herald of Death? A demon in human skin whose true visage remained a mystery even to the Dark Prince. He quickly shook off the thought as paranoia. After all, the legends described the Herald as a gaunt, shadowy phantom, whereas Kraut was built like a tank and completely barely resembled that profile. Plus, his eyes lacked the clouded madness of a demon. For now, Kaix decided the smartest move was to keep this dangerous variable within arm's reach. Kraut, bowing respectfully, explained he had been trying to summon the prince for some time without success. He reported that a merchant by the name of Gerard Milsers was desperate for an audience, hence the manhunt. Kaix smirked at the irony. Before he could even hunt down Gerard, the target had delivered himself on a silver platter. Just then, the visitor approached, offering a formal salute to the Prince of Sheckchen. Kaix nodded, noting he was aware of the Milsers Corporation, acknowledging that while their guild was small, their foundation was rock solid. Competent players are always welcome on my board, he stated coolly. Gerard feigned humility, but Kaix countered immediately, reminding him that he held no official crown or scepter yet, and that administrative trifles should be taken to the acting proxy Russell. The merchant pushed back, arguing that while Baron Russell held the pen, the true ruler was Prince standing before him, and no soul would dare challenge his absolute authority. I am merely the heir, and I dislike being put on a pedestal, Kaix replied, with ice in his voice. Gerard smiled, calling it modesty. Before dropping a bombshell, he knew the war for the throne was already over, and Kaix had emerged as the sole victor. Feigning shock, the prince retorted that no official decree had been made questioning the source of such dangerous intel. I have my methods, Gerard purred, apologizing insincerely, if he had overstepped. Surviving in this cutthroat market requires ears everywhere. In the privacy of his mind, however, Gerard realized the prince was no naive child. Kaix was cynical, sharp, and dangerous. Was it possible that a boy not yet of age had fooled the entire world, masking his true nature beneath a facade of innocence? Furthermore, the prince's visuals were god tier, a beauty so devastating it could make even a hardened man's heart skip a beat. Gerard concluded that Kaix was exactly his type of chaotic element. Sensing the shift in the air, Kaix stood up, abruptly. I am not a man with time to waste. If you're done playing games, leave. The meeting couldn't end now, or Gerard's entire scheme would crumble. He had to keep the boy in the room. My deepest apologies for the delay, he stammered, trying to stall for time. Kaix wondered what trap the merchant was setting, but ordered him to speak plainly. It was, finally then, that Gerard played his ace card, the astronomical debt the late Count had left behind. Finding. Complete ignorance. Kaix claimed this was the first he'd heard of it, noting how convenient it was for such a liability to appear exactly when the treasury was in chaos. Gerard had anticipated this defense, a confident smirk playing on his lips. The merchant's petty tactic was futile. His true intention was to crush the young lord under the weight of insurmountable debt and to drink in the look of absolute despair on his face. To a predator like him, witnessing the fall of nobility was the greatest ecstasy life could to offer. He revealed the lethal clause 3 years had passed since the loan was issued, and he was now demanding payment in full. Barely restraining his wicked grin, he dropped the hammer. The total comes to 60,000 gold coins, and I expect every single coin, right now. The staggering figure struck Kraut like a physical blow. But Kaix, the guard couldn't fathom why his master remained so stoic. Gerard, however, scoffed internally. He was convinced the prince's calm was a fragile mask, certain that any normal man in a situation would be trembling in terror. To him, it was only a matter of time before the boy's spirit shattered. While Prince Kaul sat on his throne like a statue of ice, Kraut desperately begged for mercy, trying to negotiate for a shred of extra time to make the payment. But the merchant Gerard was a wall of stone. He sneered, claiming the county's credit had died along with the late Count Colin. He insisted that out of respect for their former bond, he had already been generous by waiting a year. But now the prince, as the future ruler, needed to prove his worth by settling the score. Spiraling into a panic, Kraut didn't know where to turn. Kaix, however, saw right through the merchant's dirty game. Showing up exactly 2 weeks before, the deadline proved this was a calculated execution, not a collection. Taking command of the room, the prince informed to him that the territory's revenue was merely 6,000 gold coins. Yet he would secure the full 60,000 loan from another source to wipe the slate clean. The declaration stunned Kraut, and although it momentarily threw Gerard off balance, the merchant quickly recovered. He doubted anyone would lend a fortune to a naive child who was foolish enough to even entertain the idea. Still, he announced he would return soon to seal their fate. In his twisted mind, Gerard was already the lord of this land. Certain victory was in his grasp. He walked away drunk on the fantasy of the proud prince crawling at his feet in the mud. He even entertained the sickening thought of breaking the beautiful noble and selling him into slavery after having his fun. With a heart full of poison, Gerard departed, leaving behind a seemingly contemplative prince. Kraut wailed in anguish, calling the amount absurd and the task a death sentence. Kaix, however, cut him off with a voice sharp as a blade, commanding him to drop the subject. The advisor couldn't understand his master's calmness while their world burned. Little did he know, Kaix's mind was already miles away, locked onto a singular objective: breaching the secret vault within the Gold Plateau. He knew well that the continent of Erin was not a place to be traveled lightly. Survival required absolute caution. The Gold Plateau was a hellscape, a natural fortress, swarming with high-level beasts. In his past life as Sunbei, he had wisely steered clear of that death trap whenever possible. But now, fate had forced his hand. As Kaix stood up to leave, Kraut stammered, asking for his destination. The prince knew he needed a guide who had walked through hell and survived, and he already had the perfect candidate in mind. He marched to the dungeon where the guards bowed low, proclaiming what an honor his presence was. Kaix demanded to see a specific inmate, dragging the confused Kraut along with him. The advisor froze when he realized that this was the very cell where the dangerous Gidris was held. Inside, however, the atmosphere was shockingly domestic. Laya stepped forward, casually explaining her redecorating choices. The previous gaudy trash didn't suit me. It's not my style. Kaix looked around, amused. I take it you're enjoying your vacation. You can see with your own eyes that I am, she replied, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Irritated Kraut barked at the girl, demanding she show respect to royalty. But Laya didn't even glance at the insect. Her eyes were locked on Kaul. You played me. She had believed. His poison threat was real, but the prince simply smirked, noting she had realized the bluff soon enough. From his sudden arrival, Laya deduced everything he needed. Her skills. Don't expect me to volunteer, she declared coldly. But if you make it worth my while, I might listen. Kraut looked ready to execute her for insolence. How dare you speak? Like that to the Prince Kaix, however, raised a hand to halt him. I'm offering you a lifeline, Laya. What are you talking about? The girl snapped. The prince explained that freedom would be her death sentence. She wouldn't last a day, with the war raging between the Sheckchen and Kassala families. Laya spat back, accusing him of turning Stella into a villain and shattering her son's cultivation core. And you, Kaix, countered smoothly, are the living evidence of their crimes. In that instant, the truth struck her like a lightning bolt. The Kassala clan wanted her head to bury the testimony against the countess. She had foolishly clung to the hope that her family would rescue her, not realizing she was their prey. Gambine's monocore is gone forever and will not return, Call stated ruthlessly. You helped incinerate your family's ambitions, and there is no turning back the clock now. That you have become a discarded pawn, and the Kassala family never leaves loose ends. The realization hit Laya like a physical blow. The blood of her kin had been spilled for far trivial reasons. She just never imagined the blade would turn on her next. A blaze of fury consumed her. She snatched the nearest weapon and lunged at the prince, channeling all her misfortune into a single strike. If there was no salvation, then she would drag him down to hell with her. She would finish what she started. But in the midst of her desperate suicidal charge, Kraut moved faster than a shadow. He intercepted the blow, stopping Laya's assassination attempt cold. Kaix offered a nod of thanks, but his voice remained icy as he warned his knight. Do not underestimate her. She was a crucial piece on the board for my ascension. The prince's eyes darkened as he spoke. People harbor a deeper hatred for those who force them to face their own weakness than for those who actually push them into the abyss. It is the path of least resistance. Unloading wrath on a convenient target brings a fleeting peace, even if that target is innocent. Yet, as he looked at the assassin, he saw the fire in her eyes. Laya was not one to accept death quietly. Her survival instinct was roaring like a beast. And Laya proved him right. Declaring with venom in her voice that she refused to die, she would claw her way through anything to stay alive. Seeing such ferocious will, the prince smiled. He had a proposition. He would guarantee her safety, but the price was her service on a covert operation. He added that this protection extended to those she held dear. Laya's expression twisted. She heard not a promise, but a veiled threat against her people. She snapped back, vowing she would never let her family be used as hostages. However, the prince raised a hand, correcting her assumption instantly. He cared nothing for Laya or her bloodline. Warriors with her skill set were common as dirt. The young woman paused. The cold logic in his words rang true. In this world, people like her were easily replaced, yet a question gnawed at her. Then why me? Why choose a broken tool when you have 1,000 others? Kaix's gaze lingered on her. He mentioned a specific phrase she had uttered once, leaving her bewildered. But he offered no answers. Instead, he gave her exactly 1 minute to decide. Laya grit her teeth. The idea left a bitter taste, but she calculated the odds. The prince was correct. She was a hunter of traitors. She knew exactly how the Kossalas treated loose ends. Freedom meant death. Driven by a primal need to survive, she made her choice. The feud between the families had crossed the point of no return. Soon, one house would be erased from history. She decided to bet on the winner. Kaix nodded, satisfied with her submission. But Laya was not done. She slammed her conditions onto the table. She would not be a dog on a leash, but a mercenary under contract, and she would reject any order unrelated to the mission. Kraut bristled at her audacity, his hand twitching toward his blade. But Laya stood firm. She did not seek to disrespect. She simply demanded the respect due to a professional. That included proper payment in gold. She finished her declaration, stating that from this second forward they were allies, and allies do not strike one another. The thought of working with her clearly left a sour taste in Kraut's mouth. Breaking the thick tension, the prince recalled Laya's intel regarding the Kossala Shadow Unit training grounds on the Gold Plateau. How does that connect to our objective? She demanded. Kaix ignored her query, turning instead to Kraut to request a detailed tactical map of the kingdom and the territories bordering the Ada, Kossala lands. The knight confirmed that such a classified document was in the war room and offered to escort his liege. The prince, however, froze for a split second. A bead of sweat formed. This hesitation piqued Kraut's curiosity. Kaix quickly waved it off, feigning indifference, and commanded the soldier to lead on. Do you perhaps not know the way, Your Highness? Kraut asked innocently. Indeed, the prince was lost, but admitting weakness was impossible. He simply insisted Kraut take point. Moments later, they stood in the barracks strategy room. Kraut unfurled the map, a masterpiece of cartography, one of the most accurate military documents on the continent of Erin. The prince's finger landed heavily on the Gold Plateau. He commanded the soldier to spill every secret about this region. Kraut explained that this land was a cauldron of conflict, a disputed territory between the Kosala family and the barony of Erebon. Both sides claimed the rights to the high-quality copper veins beneath the soil, but the war had stalled all mining operations. The strategic value lay in the fact that the barony of Erebon was a vassal state of the Sheckchen family. Kaix frowned. The map felt wrong. It was outdated. Kraut lowered his head, admitting he could not guarantee the current terrain data. Laya stepped forward, a smirk playing on her lips. She knew that hellscape like the back of her hand. With her guidance, the map would be flawless. Hearing this, the prince finally unveiled his true ambition. Hidden on the gold plateau was an ancient ruin he intended to conquer. The mercenary blinked, claiming she had never heard of such a structure. The prince leaned in his eyes, piercing through her. Think back. When you were a child, was there not a place the elders forbade you from ever entering? The question struck a chord deep within her psyche, and a buried memory clawed its way to the surface. Laya confirmed it. Such a place truly existed. His interest piqued. Kaix demanded to know how long the Kosala family had guarded this dark secret. She confessed she was the 6th generation to carry the burden. She had served for 5 years, but the true rot began 15 years ago. Kraut's eyes narrowed. That timeline aligned perfectly with the bloody land dispute between the Kosala and Erebon clans. Laya scoffed, her patience wearing thin. She asked if his thick skull finally grasped the situation. When he denied it, she spat insults. Sparks flew as they clashed, but the prince's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Enough. He explained the cold logic of war. To forge a massive army requires a mountain of resources. A sudden expansion is impossible. Unless, of course, a river of gold had been flowing into the Kosala family coffers. A source discovered exactly 15 years prior. With that dark fortune, they had been training a shadow army for clandestine operations. Just as they had done with Laya. The girl blinked, confusion clouding her gaze. What did money have to do with ancient ruins? Kaix smiled, a predator sensing prey. Where there is copper, silver often hides nearby. An ally stepped forward, his voice grave. Secretly mining silver was high treason. He asked if the prince was accusing the Kosala family of such a capital crime. Kaix didn't hesitate. The suspicion was all but confirmed. Even on their own land, the law was absolute. Gold and silver belonged to the imperial crown. The nobles had concealed this treasure, and the legend of the dangerous ruins was the perfect veil for their greed. Laya's expression hardened. Was Kaix planning to declare war on a rival territory just to seize their wealth? Kraut immediately shot it down. The prince's county was not yet strong enough to challenge them openly. It would be suicide. Kaix agreed. To take the wealth by force would alert the crown, bringing the wrath of the empire down upon their heads. They were at a stalemate. Laya demanded to know the alternative. The prince's eyes gleamed with a cunning light. His strategy was simple yet ruthless. All that dirty money had to be stored in one central vault. If someone were to liberate that fortune, the Kosalas could never report the theft without admitting their own treason. It was an audacious plan. To rob the robbers. They would steal everything the enemy had worked so hard to hide. That very night, as the shadows lengthened, Russell intercepted the prince. The old administrator's face was etched with worry. He warned that the Golden Plateau was a death trap. Leaving the hot-headed Kraut in charge was a gamble he didn't like. He pleaded with Kaix to reconsider. Walking into the lion's den was an unnecessary risk, a grave mistake for a future ruler. Kaix sighed, recognizing the concern of a grandfather figure. He placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, promising he would return. The young wolves like Kraut needed to taste the battlefield. They had to mature quickly if they were to conquer the path ahead. Furthermore, Russell was the shield of the territory. The prince could not afford to leave his home unguarded. Russell bowed his head, defeated by the prince's logic. He wished his lord luck, but his eyes remained stern. He turned his gaze to the young warrior. If a single scratch appeared on Kaix, Kraut would pay the price. The young knight vowed to protect his master with his life. Russell glared, his aura oppressive. Failure was not an option. Turning to the gathered soldiers, Russell's voice boomed. The prince had barely recovered from his injuries, yet for the sake of their land, he was risking everything. This was the burden of true leadership. He ordered every man present to become a human shield. Protect the prince, even if it meant breathing your last breath. Kaix watched them resolute. No soldier follows a weak lord. He had to earn their loyalty with strength, and he would need to keep a close eye on Laya. With their resolve steeled, the group vanished into the underground passage. Kraut took point, descending into the abyss with the prince close behind. The air grew cold and stale. The tunnel was their lifeline out of the castle, but the journey would be long. They had to move as one entity. After what felt like an eternity in the dark, they reached the end. Kraut grunted, struggling against the heavy iron door. As he waited, Kaix smirked. Without his muscle-headed knight, he never would have navigated this labyrinth. The door groaned open with a metallic shriek. They braced themselves for whatever lay beyond the threshold. The prince blinked in surprise. He hadn't known where the tunnel led, but Kraut quickly oriented him. They were at an abandoned watermill, a ghost of the past. Outside, a carriage stood waiting in the moonlight. Kraut motioned for the prince to mount his horse, but Kaix cut him off with a sharp glare. "Do not call me prince," he hissed. Formalities were a death sentence out here. They were in disguise. Kaix scanned his men, dressed in the garb of common merchants. It felt flimsy. He turned to his ally, his voice low. "Is everything ready?" Kraut confirmed the order, but his face twisted in sheer disgust. Must we truly degrade ourselves with such a foul stench? Kaix smirked, finding amusement in his knight's distress. You could always don the rags of a lowly porter. Or perhaps, play the role of a loving husband to Laya. The mere suggestion ignited a firestorm of denial. Kraut roared, refusing to let his liege suffer such humiliation. He glared at Laya with open hostility, sparking a tense standoff. Desperate to shield his master, Kraut volunteered himself for the husband role. Laya's expression curdled instantly at the thought. Kaix saw the catastrophe unfolding before it even began. Their acting skills were abysmal, a tragedy in the making. He had zero desire to endure their endless quarreling. In moments like this, the line between worlds faded. He almost forgot this was merely a game. The vividness of their emotions made it feel terrifyingly real. Calculations ran through his mind. This was the perfect stage for Laya to prove her utility to the party. But idle thoughts had to end. The sun was dipping below the horizon, and destiny waited for no one. At Kaix's signal, Kraut rallied the troops. The caravan finally lurched forward, piercing into the unknown. Days bled into nights, a cycle of marching and makeshift camps. Yet Kaix felt alive in the dust of the road. Deep in the wilderness, Kraut reported their position. They had finally crossed the boundary of civilization. It was time. Kaix's voice cut through the air. "Cast aside your masks. The charade is over." By the first light of dawn, the air grew heavy with tension. "Now the true battle begins," Kaix declared. His aura sharpened as he prepped the men. Suddenly, Kraut sensed a disturbance in the flow of the forest. A scout stumbled back, gasping for air. The report was grim. Forest giants ahead. A squad of at least 5. Kaix's eyes narrowed. He signaled his loyal knight. "Launch me skyward. I need a vantage point." Without hesitation, Kraut hurled his liege into the heavens. The force was excessive but effective. Gravity loosened its grip as Kaix surveyed the battlefield. There, amidst the canopy, the enemy lurked. Formidable beasts with power to spare. He landed gracefully, turning to his subordinate. "Strategy, Kraut." "Speak," the knight answered instantly. "We trapped them with a wall of flames, a standard military tactic." Kaix's gaze turned ice cold. Disappointment flashed in his eyes. He shot the plan down immediately. Relying on uncertain variables was a death sentence. He knew the monster ecology better than any soul alive. His knowledge was absolute, but convincing these NPCs was a battle of its own. Kraut was already surging with adrenaline. The knight prepared to charge solo. Kaix suppressed a sigh. Even if he leashed Kraut, the others were too eager to die. It wasn't a strategy. It was suicide. Pure, unadulterated recklessness, fueled by ignorance. Only Kaix saw the abyss they were walking into. Words were useless now. Only power spoke this language. He had to dominate the battlefield. Without earning their awe, he would remain nothing but baggage in their eyes. While the others bustled with futile preparations, Kaix stood still, a predator calculating the kill. A shadow approached. It was Laya. "We need to talk." Her tone was grave, cutting through the noise. "Kraut is marching to his doom," she hissed. "Anyone who follows that fool will perish. The knight has courage, I'll grant him that. But bravery without brains is just a quicker way to the grave." "I know," Kaix replied, his voice flat. "Then why do you stand there? Why haven't you intervened?" "Because I'm devising a path to victory that doesn't shatter our hierarchy." Laya's eyes gleamed. "I have a plan." Kaix gestured for her to continue. "The big feet. Their maternal instinct is their greatest weakness. Once combat starts, the females will prioritize the young. They will flee to secure the lineage, while the males hold the line in a frenzy." "I am aware," Kaix interrupted coldly. "Skip the lecture." She flinched at his sharpness, but regained composure. "One question first. Annihilation or breakthrough? We just need to cross their territory. In that case, we manipulate their fear. We target the nest." She laid out the formation. 5 squads blocked the path. "We use Kraut as the anvil to draw their rage, while a second team circles like a hammer threatening their sanctuary." It was a classic pincer movement. Panic will force a retreat to defend their kin. That momentary chaos is our window to slip through. Kaix nodded slowly. I arrived at the same conclusion. But a fatal flaw made me pause. The team attacking the hideout. Facing parents maddened by fear for their young, that is a descent into hell, and hunt down the invaders without mercy. It was a mission leading straight to death's door. I will go. To his shock, Laya stepped forward. That was my plan all along. Kaix's gaze sharpened like a blade. You possess a nymph's potion, don't you? The shock on Laya's face was undeniable. How did you wouldn't risk your life on a suicide run without a hidden ace. And I know that with the right herb leading the big feet to their doom is child's play. Laya studied him closely. I have known the prince for years, but you are not the man you used to be. The strategy is sound, Kaix admitted. But one mistake means death. Fear not. This terrain is my playground since childhood. I can handle myself. Why this sudden loyalty? He asked. If your house falls, mine crumbles with it. She answered with cold pragmatism. I need you alive. The logic was ironclad. Earning their respect won't be easy, with just words. Are you prepared? Laya simply nodded. Before you depart, listen closely. Kaix pointed toward the looming peak. With big feet, always assume 2 more lurk in the shadows than what your eyes can see. Hunters always strike from the rear. That is their way. I suspect 2 hideouts. I know. 1. Laya cut in. The Goblin Hill ahead. A known nest for monsters. That intel is worth its weight in gold, the prince affirmed. We move now. We have no other choice. Laya expected him to order the rend. Knights to hold the line, but Kaix stopped her. First, I have a command for you, requests to make. From afar, Kraut watched suspicion furrowing his brow at their intimate proximity. Unaware of the knight's glare, the prince whispered a secret order. Laya's cheeks burned red, a spark of intrigue lighting her eyes. Kaix froze, fearing a misunderstanding, but instead of retreating, she stepped into his space, closing the distance until the air between them crackled with tension, leaving him breathless. However, Laya's gesture was deceptively simple. Delicately, she reached out and removed a speck of dust from Kaix's cheek. The intimacy, however small, shattered the prince's composure, leaving him as exposed as a nervous fan meeting a legend. Breaking the moment, Kraut stormed in, demanding answers. Kaix instantly feigned ignorance, ordering his ally to prep Laya's gear, declaring her mission was starting. He warned Kraut, do not panic if she vanishes into thin air. With brutal honesty, Kraut spat that he didn't trust her, asking why the prince would give her such a burden. Kaix's voice turned to steel. Trust my judgment, ask no more. Their survival hung by a thread, and unity was their only shield. Reluctantly, the soldier bowed to the order. Then, Laya moved to arm herself. She cast aside her cloak, revealing her form and stunning the onlookers. Ignoring their gaping stares, the warrior focused on donning her armor, her mind sharp for the battle ahead. Finally, she applied a pungent scent to mask her presence from the beasts. Even Kraut had to respect her warrior's spirit. Laya remained unmoved by the loaded chaos. Her mind was a blade sharpened for the kill. Shall I begin? The prince nodded, offering an escort, but she refused. They will only slow me down. No one commands me, but she vanished without a backward glance. Kraut rallied his men, marching into the fray without delay. The monsters appeared instantly. Kaix noted the wind blew toward the enemy. Yet Laya had gone against the current. A tactical error, or a genius move, he couldn't tell, but time had run out. The beasts had locked onto them. Without hesitation, Kraut lunged his blade, biting into a big foot, but the wound was shallow. From his vantage point, Kaix grimaced. A frontal charge was foolish. They needed to strike the weak points, not make a reckless advance. Kraut realized his folly as the beast's rage exploded. A massive fist flew. The soldier barely blocked the bone-crushing impact. From the ridge, Kaix watched the clash of titans in awe. But the enemy was not finished. With a deafening roar, it summoned its kin. Chaos erupted. Facing this catastrophe, Kaix realized only one option remained: burn it all down. Still, the knight prepared. Kraut roared a command to advance, his voice booming as he warned the young master to maintain distance. When the beast wave surged again, Kraut was prepared. Mana flooded his blade, unleashing a devastating counterstrike. The impact exploded outward. A shockwave of pure destruction tore through the battlefield, pulverizing the enemy ranks. With the mob finally silenced, Kraut turned, seeking validation from Prince Kaix. But the royal heir remained cold as ice. His Highness's gaze was locked on the mission objective, ignoring the display of strength. Kraut's moment of pride was shattered by a sickening noise. He spun around, horror gripping his heart. His men were being slaughtered like lambs. Lacking the skills to defend themselves, the soldiers were easy prey for the remaining beasts. The captain didn't hesitate. He plunged into the abyss of combat to save his squad, shouting for them to hold the line. But brute force wasn't working. Taking them down one by one was suicide. A tactical shift was required immediately. He fought on, but their hides were harder than iron. A heavy blow sent Kraut crashing to the dirt. His defense was broken, leaving him wide open to death. As the monster moved in for the execution, Kraut's survival instinct kicked in. He read the trajectory and countered with surgical precision. The beast howled as steel bit into flesh. "Now, push back," the captain screamed. But suddenly, a cold sweat betrayed his victory. During his initial scan, he had marked 8 hostiles, but the 8th presence had vanished from his senses. The realization hit him just as a shadow detached itself from the darkness. Ignoring the mobs, the assassin beast charged straight for the prince. Crouch launched himself forward, desperate to intercept. But Albu the prince's personal shield was already in motion. "Retreat, Your Highness," Albu commanded, throwing his body into the path of the monstrosity. But the creature moved with godlike agility, vanishing into thin air. "Did we get it?" the prince asked, eyes scanning the void. Horror dawned on them as the beast materialized through the smoke, closing in on Albu with supernatural speed. The bodyguard was hopelessly outmatched. With a single casual strike, he was ragdolled across the clearing. Kaix watched, frozen by the gap in their stats. A soldier named Thomas stepped up, trembling but resolved. "Stay behind me, master," he cried, rushing the beast to buy a single second of time. His attack bounced off harmlessly. "It's futile. If we continue this way, it's a total party wipe." Kaix's voice cut through the chaos with chilling authority. "We can hold the line," Thomas pleaded. "Holding is pointless," the prince countered coldly. "Reinforcements are a fantasy that isn't coming. If the vanguard falls, you will die alone. The odds are plummeting by the second." The soldier faltered, torn between duty and logic. His prime directive was to protect the royal bloodline at all costs. But Kaix's reasoning was absolute. Pulling rank, the prince commanded, "Leave me go. Save your brothers in arms." Recognizing the weight of a direct order, Thomas nodded grimly and charged back into the main fray. Meanwhile, on the edge of the battlefield, a broken figure lay in the dust. Kaix rushed to Albu's side. The bodyguard had been discarded like a broken toy. His breathing was shallow, his life force fading rapidly. Kaix stripped away the ruined armor and poured a potion down his throat. But the system notifications were grim. The damage was too severe. A low-tier elixir was useless here. He needed a healer class or a high-grade restorative. Gripping his sword, he swore an oath to return with salvation. Moments later, Kaix confirmed the intel was solid. He found the goblin camp, the grotesque feeding ground of the Bigfoots. The stench of death was nauseating. One wrong move here meant an instant game over. He mentally reviewed the strategy. Laya would handle the trap setup. The soldiers were the aggro bait. But a shiver of primal fear crawled up his spine. This wasn't a simulation anymore. He wasn't safe behind a monitor in his gaming chair. This was reality, visceral and terrifying. Swallowing his fear, he initiated the plan, taunting the nearest beast to draw aggro. The monster took the bait instantly. Roaring with bloodlust, it charged like a freight train. But just before impact snap, wooden stakes erupted from the earth, impaling the beast from below. The enemy crumbled, HP hitting 0 before it could even scratch the prince. Witnessing its kin fall, another Bigfoot went berserk. It lunged at Kaix, blinded by vengeance. This time there was no trap to save him. He was truly alone. With a burst of adrenaline, the prince dodged. The devastating strike missed by inches. Before the beast could reset its stance, a weighted net exploded over it. It was completely neutralized. Kaix recognized the craftsmanship immediately. Arachne silk, coated with Triton's paralyzing agent. A lethal combo against melee types. Laya's stealth skill was terrifyingly high. She had masked her presence perfectly. Her scent was undetectable, her approach silent as a ghost. With the mob immobilized, the execution phase began. Kaix stepped forward, blade raised. For the first time, he felt the resistance of sinew and bone yielding to his steel. The sensation was sickeningly real. Back in the game, death was just a mouse click. But this was the heavy price of survival, taking a life. The sensation was alien, leaving a bitter taste of revulsion on his tongue. Yet, something felt wrong. A beast that could match a fourth-class knight. Why was its final resistance so pathetic? Lost in the fog of his thoughts, Kaix lowered his guard. A fatal error on the battlefield. By the time he sensed the killing intent from the shadows, it was nearly too late. Prince Kaix barely evaded the assassin's strike, but only because Albu, the loyal soldier, threw himself in the way once more. Still reeling from the ambush, Kaix scrambled to identify the threat. A goblin. Beside him, Albu collapsed to the earth, blood staining the soil. Watching a defenseless man take a blow meant for him. Pure fury ignited within the prince. Blinded by rage, Kaix swung his blade with all his might. But he struck only empty air. The goblin, moving with grotesque agility, danced away and launched a vicious counter. Steel tore through the prince's tunic. Death grazed his skin. The cold reality crashed down on him. His swordplay was amateurish. He was at a catastrophic disadvantage against the monster's supernatural speed. Yet even as fear clawed at him, a spark of defiance refused to die. The goblin lunged. Kaix thrust his sword forward, but missed by a heartbreaking inch. This time the creature smirked, revealing a hidden dagger for the killing blow. Fate alone allowed him to twist away, but he knew that luck was a finite resource. As the monster coiled for the execution, Kaix's lack of technique left him exposed. In that split second, survival instinct eclipsed skill. With a desperate, precise kick, he sent the dagger spinning from the creature's grip. Disarmed the goblin was, open for a fraction of a second. Kaix seized the moment, channeling every ounce of his wrath into one devastating thrust. Impact was thunderous, pinning the wretched beast against the trunk of an ancient tree. Gasping for air, the prince stared at the gruesome tableau. The weight of his actions crushed his soul. This was no simulation. The icy grip of imminent death had been terrifyingly real. As the light faded from the creature's eyes, a blue holographic screen flashed in his vision. System first battle victory. Reward inventory unlocked. Moments later, Kraut burst into the clearing, panic etched into his features. But his jaw dropped at the bizarre sight. A goblin skewer on a tree and a massive Bigfoot ensnared in a trap. "My lord, are you wounded?" "No, I am intact." Fortunately, once the alpha fell, the pack scattered. "We were lucky." "Luck? No, my lord. This was Laya's strategy." "Call." Kaix paused, his eyes darting around. "And Albu, where is he?" "He was right here." Kraut gestured somberly toward the tree line. As he looked in that direction, the prince's blood ran cold. A sense of dread gripped his heart. Prince Kaix replayed the events in his mind. In a domain of monsters, sacrifice is the currency of survival. But he never imagined the price would be Albu. Staring at his companion's still body, a mountain of guilt collapsed upon Kaix. He whispered, his voice trembling, cursing his own negligence for this tragedy. The prince's raw agony did not go unnoticed by his subordinates. Kraut stepped forward, offering the cold comfort of a warrior. "Do not blame yourself. A soldier lives to protect his liege." Albu fulfilled his destiny with glory. Glory, Kaix snapped, his eyes blazing. To him there was no such thing as a beautiful death. Kraut realized this was likely the young prince's first taste of loss, justifying the outburst. But Kaix was unaware that the nightmare was far from over. His gaze snapped to more stretchers being hauled into the camp. "Report," he demanded, his voice tight with tension. Kraut delivered the grim tally. 3 dead. 1 wounded. The words hit the prince like a physical blow, a fresh wave of despair washing over him. The abyss of guilt swallowed him whole. If only he had utilized his otherworldly knowledge sooner. Perhaps they would still be breathing. His survival felt like a fraud, bought with Laya's traps and Albu's blood. His frustration boiled over, erupting into a primal scream that shook the very air, startling the troops. But he forced himself to breathe. Kaix declared that the fallen deserved reverence. He ordered Kraut to prepare the bodies with the dignity befitting heroes. The general immediately signaled his men. But as Kraut watched the soldiers, he saw a shift in the atmosphere. The prince's tears his genuine heartbreak for the rank and file, and it moved them. In their eyes, Kraut no longer saw mere obligation, but a burning, fanatical determination to shield this man from the world. The prince had not just commanded them, he had captured their souls. A short while later, Kraut bowed. Preparations are complete. The fallen had been treated with high-grade preservation potions. The unit stood silent, awaiting orders. Kaix felt the change in the air. The soldier's eyes burned with a new intensity. He understood. There was no room for weakness now. Only strength. His burden was to lead his duty to ignite the flames of hope. His voice boomed like thunder as he praised their valor in the clash. "Do not rest yet. The battle is far from over," Kaix commanded with the presence of a king. "The strong shall carry the weak. Leave no brother behind," the army roared in response to his absolute authority. 1 hour prior, Laya was moving like a phantom through the Bigfoot forest. But even a master can slip. A split-second lapse betrayed her location. Killing intent flooded the air. She stared death in the face as the beast swung narrowly, evading a catastrophic blow. But fear did not touch this veteran. Instead of freezing, her combat instincts took over with surgical precision. She abandoned brute force for tactics. With feline agility, Laya launched herself up a massive tree, transforming her climbing gear into a deadly snare. Seizing the high ground, she cast her lasso, ensnaring the beast below. The monster was immobilized. The trap had snapped shut perfectly. For a heartbeat, Laya thought she had cleared the dungeon without breaking a sweat. But suddenly the beast's aura exploded with berserk fury, in a display of terrifying strength. The monster ripped the ancient tree from the earth and swung it like a twig. The counterattack was so violent, the shockwave nearly crushed her. The beast charged with bloodlust, but like a true professional, she danced away from death at the final second. She seized the opening, binding the creature between the trees again. Got you, she thought, confident. This was reinforced rope. Resistance was futile. But she had underestimated the boss monster's stats. Its power defied logic. It began to tear the forest apart to free itself. Laya realized physical restraints were useless. Her only option was to inject the Triton's potion directly into its veins. She had to strike now or die. The beast did not wait. It unleashed a storm of violence, missing her by mere inches as she slipped through its guard. A critical opening, she drove the syringe into. The monster's blind spot, a place it could not reach. The poison was in, but Laya felt a chill of doubt. Would it be enough to fell such a titan? She could only trust the strategy. The Bigfoot went into a frenzy, thrashing with world-shaking aggression. Snap. A tree gave way. Her trap was failing. She had seconds left, but irony struck. The beast's own rage pumped the poison faster through its bloodstream. Boom. The giant crashed to the earth, silenced at last. Laya stood over the fallen boss, stunned. The timing was impeccable. She bit her lip. She hated to admit it, but when it came to alchemy, the prince was playing 4D chess. Yet his sudden transformation terrified her. She had shadowed Kaix for a year. She would have noticed this potential. This was a different man, perhaps. This change was an opportunity. Before, her vengeance felt like a dream, but now the path was becoming clear. Meanwhile, Prince Kaix led his forces until he sensed the army's stamina hitting zero. Halt, he signaled Kraut. We rest here. The moment the march stopped, the prince walked among the ranks, handing out recovery potions like candy. The soldiers' eyes went wide. To commoners, these were treasures worth a fortune. Kaix ordered them to drink, but General Kraut panicked, intervening immediately. My liege, these are low-grade, but they cost a fortune. Viscount Russell brewed these personally. This is half the kingdom's entire stockpile. Kaix's eyes flashed with irritation. You expect me to watch my soldiers suffer over gold? Kraut tried to stammer an excuse, but his logic crumbled before the prince's resolve. Relax, General Kaix declared with absolute confidence. After this raid, our vaults will overflow. We will chug potions like they are tap water. What? The general was floored. In a wave of overwhelming emotion, the soldiers rose and knelt in absolute submission. Kraut watched the scene awestruck. A warrior dies for the one who knows his worth, he mused. He has captured their hearts completely. Kaix, however, felt his face heat up at the intense loyalty. He turned away, opening his system window. Ding's support rate has skyrocketed. Excellent, he smirked. Time to move. The caravan marched with renewed vigor, the prince's eyes locked on the prize. Halfway there, Kaix raised his hand. We have arrived. Kraut looked around, confused. No fortress, no guards, just an empty wasteland. Was this truly the place? The silence was deafening, his anxiety mounting with every passing second. Laya had vanished without a trace, severing their connection. Ignoring the confusion of his troops, the prince issued an absolute command to construct the base camp on a precise, seemingly random coordinate. Once the command tent was erected, he slammed a finger onto the map. Here lies the vault's true location. The soldiers stared at the map in horror. The target was a staggering distance from their current position. Kraut stepped forward, his face pale. He ran the calculations frantically. My liege. If this coordinate is correct, it requires another 7 days of forced marching. The men are running on fumes, Kraut warned, desperation in his voice. They move on sheer willpower alone. To push them further, it would leave half our forces dead in the dirt, Thomas interjected grimly. But staying here isn't an option either. Remaining stationary makes us sitting ducks, Thomas argued. The enemy scouts will sniff us out before the sun sets. You misunderstand completely. Kaix cut through the tension, a mysterious glint in his eyes. I merely identified the vault's location on the map, he explained calmly. I never said we were marching there. Kraut blinked, completely baffled. Then, is the mission aborted? Is the prince surrendering? Hardly, Kaix replied with a smirk. The secret entrance isn't miles away, he declared, his voice dropping to a whisper. It is right beneath our feet. With a flourish, Kaix strode to the tent's center and channeled mana into a concealed mechanism hidden within the floorboards. Asterisk, rumble times. The ground split open, revealing a dark, ancient passage. The soldiers froze, eyes wide with absolute shock. The prince hadn't just guessed, he times knew asterisk. His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was absolute certainty. But the question burned in their minds. How could he possibly possess such forbidden knowledge? As Kaix moved to descend, his knights formed a human wall. My liege, we cannot let you enter an unknown dungeon without a vanguard. It's safe, the prince dismissed, but his men were adamant. Intrigued by the display, Kraut stepped closer. Young master, your knowledge of this dungeon runs deep. Who is your informant? My sources are my own, Kaix deflected, his expression darkening. I know you see me as weak, as incompetent. It is only natural you doubt my leadership. The self-deprecation hung heavy in the air. That's not it. Kraut stammered, but Thomas stepped forward, his voice like steel. I believe in the prince, a leader who values the lives of his grunts. Is a leader worthy of my sword, Thomas roared. The sentiment ignited a fire in the platoon. We follow the young master, they shouted in unison. Even to the gates of death. Kaix looked away, the shadow of his curse haunting him. But I am powerless, unable to even wield mana. I am unworthy. Strength is not merely physical, my lord, Thomas countered softly. True power stems from an unshakable heart. The word struck a chord. Kraut, overcome with emotion, let tears of manly pride stream down his face. Composing himself, Kaix assumed the mantle of command. Enough. We cannot waste this momentum. For the wounded, for the exhausted, we advance now. His allies nodded, weapons drawn, ready to breach the darkness. As the team moved out, a fleeting thought crossed the prince's mind. Asterisk. Laya. Stay alive. Asterisk. Miles away, the huntress stood over a fallen beast. The Bigfoot was dead. She extracted a vital blood sample, her trophy secured. Flames consumed the carcass, erasing the evidence. She scaled a tree with cat-like agility to scan the battlefield. The smoke would draw monsters like moths to a flame, exactly as she planned. But from her high vantage point, a greater threat emerged. Assassins from her own guild, moving like shadows below. They were hunting her. Laya's eyes narrowed dangerously. She had no intention of being the prey. If they want a war, she thought, gripping her daggers, I'll give them a massacre. Below, the hooded figures analyzed the pile of ash. Instant disintegration. The scout trembled. They couldn't identify the killer, but the sheer destructive power terrified them. Only a high-ranking noble house possesses such magic, the leader concluded. We must alert Viscount Servio immediately. High above, Laya watched them prep their messenger pouches. Asterisk. Perfect. Asterisk. Recognizing the scout protocol, she prepared her countermove. She checked the wind direction with the instincts of a master sniper. Taking the vial of Bigfoot blood, she released it into the air current, letting the crimson mist drift toward the enemy. She melted into the shadows, waiting for the chaos to bloom. Her strategy was flawless. The metallic scent of blood, amplified by the fire, drove the forest into a frenzy. Fury erupted nearby. It wasn't just the small fry. The earth shook as the boss monster arrived, the albino king, and he was out for blood. Hunt for the mastermind. Back with the hunter squad, the leader knew time was running out. He had to deliver this vital intel to the clan head immediately. Paranoia gripped him as he ran. Every shadow looked like an enemy, and one mistake would spell doom. But fate is a cruel mistress. Even his elite training couldn't save him. Cold steel pierced his heart before he could even scream. Laya moved like a phantom. She silenced the messenger with terrifying grace. She snatched the report from his cooling corpse, her eyes narrowing at the name of the recipient. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, the prince stared into the abyss of the secret passage. Thomas credited their success to the magic crystal ball, a rare drop they were lucky to possess. The prince, however, was lost in thought. Even with the ancient wards decaying, this was too easy. Thomas broke the silence. My lord, the land belongs to Viscount Maris Antonio. He listed the loot mana crystals, arcane herbs, and enchanted artifacts, the standard toolkit for a mage. To the untrained eye, it was junk. But it proved a spellcaster had been conducting dark experiments here. The prince scoffed internally. His instincts told him a legendary treasure was sleeping right under their noses. His gaze locked onto an empty void in the room. The mana flow was different there. He stepped forward. Stop, my lord. Kraut blocked his path. His face was pale with worry about unknown traps. We must secure the perimeter first, he pleaded. The prince sighed, frustrated by his subordinate's excessive caution. Knowing he couldn't argue with loyalty, the prince waved his hand. Fine. Do your job, Kraut. After a tense search, Kraut found a concealed mechanism. The prince's eyes lit up with greed. This was it. As they entered the hidden zone, Kraut was baffled. I checked the blueprints. This space shouldn't exist. It's a mirage, Kaix interjected, his voice dripping with wisdom. A fortress of lies built to deceive. He explained the ancient ways. Mages would build labyrinths of falsehoods to protect their true legacy. It was a psychological war against grave robbers. Kraut nodded, realizing the true dungeon lay ahead. The air grew heavy with anticipation. They were close to the heart of the mystery now. The prince could barely contain his excitement. The final chamber awaited. Watch closely, the prince commanded. Focus your mana into the crystal to reveal the path. Kaix manipulated the artifact with master-level control. Suddenly, a grinding noise echoed through the hall. A door materialized from thin air. Kraut lunged for it, but Kaix shouted, "Hold your position." "It's a decoy," Kaix warned. "One wrong step triggers the defense system. Patience is our only shield." The prince continued the ritual until a different door shimmered into existence. That is the true gate. Stepping through realization struck Kraut like a hammer. The scale of the operation was massive. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a covert mining operation, completely off the grid. No workers' call observed scanning the area. They must operate on a shift rotation. Luck was on their side. A clash with the miners would have turned this mission into a bloodbath. The prince's eyes turned cold. He had to erase this operation from the face of the earth. "We destroy the key," he decided. "Without the crystal, this gate becomes a wall of stone." Sealing the mine forever was the perfect sabotage. Call grinned. "A parting gift they won't forget. Loot everything," the prince ordered. "Take the silver and leave the scroll as our calling card." Kraut hesitated, looking at his master. "My lord, I cannot leave you unguarded." "The area is clear," the prince assured him with absolute confidence. "Go. Speed is of the essence." Reluctantly, the general obeyed. As soon as he vanished, the prince let out a breath. Finally, he approached a nondescript section of the wall. A secret, only he was privy to. He possessed a weapon sharper than any sword. The memories of a player who had cleared this game. He reached into the shadows and pulled it out. Pristine's bracelet. The item shimmered with divine light. A barrier capable of nullifying a fatal blow. For a weakling, it was an extra life in this hellish world. He clasped it around his wrist, feeling the power surge. But the loot run wasn't over yet. The chamber of the bracelet seized his focus immediately. A glistening black inscription pulsed with ominous energy. The runes were alien, and deciphering them seemed impossible. However, one name blazed clearly amidst the chaos. He recognized it instantly. It was the name of the ancient goddess who, according to lore, first bestowed magic upon humanity. In all his previous regression runs, he had never stumbled upon an artifact of this magnitude, and he wondered if this was the key to his reincarnation mystery. Driven by an irresistible pull, he placed his hand on the writing. Space warped instantly, a dimensional portal activating and dragging him into a void of endless darkness. In that abyss, he witnessed a spectacle that defied logic. Unable to comprehend the form before him, he realized it must be a manifestation of that very same deity. Suddenly, the divine entity descended, and a skull-splitting migraine brought the prince to his knees. Voices began to thunder inside his psyche. A vision manifested Hectoria, the goddess, screaming in protest. "This is inhuman." Another voice, cold and tyrannically imposing, retorted that there were no humans present in the divine realm. The absolute voice continued, declaring the judgment had been passed by a majority vote of the gods, and that Hectoria had no right to oppose the pact they had forged. "This is violence," she shouted back, burning with indignation. "I will never agree to this tyranny," the cold voice mocked her stance. "If you desire to be like those humans so badly, then your wish shall be granted." In a flash of blinding light, Hectoria was struck by an overwhelming cosmic force. The protagonist watched the tragedy unfold, paralyzed by the pressure. But the horror wasn't the visual. It was the auditory assault that followed. Her screams tore through the void as her divinity was violently ripped from her soul. It was a sound of such raw agony that he felt his own sanity slipping away. For her, audacity to love humanity. Hectoria was stripped of her authority, and the mysterious voice shattered her godhood. The judgment decreed that, from this moment on, she would be an object of scorn and hatred, despised even by the very humans she had sacrificed everything to protect. The entity believed it would be fitting for these ungrateful humans to end her newly acquired mortal life, and it eagerly awaited that tragic day. Gasping for air, the prince was snapped back to the material plane, trembling from the aftershocks of the divine memory. However, what truly stunned him was the blue notification floating in his vision. He had acquired an Enevi, authority-level skill. Simply by touching the inscription, he had inherited a fragment of Hectoria's primeval power. The prince knew that standard skills were ranked from F to S, but this was different. It was a power that only gods or demigods were qualified to wield. It was the raw essence of divinity itself. and the only method to reach such a legendary class was by obtaining an authority. His status window flickered. His own rank had ascended. The puzzle pieces clicked together. The goddess Hectoria was the mastermind who summoned him to this world. Furthermore, a skill of this magnitude possessed the potential to harm even a divine being. The prince narrowed his eyes. Was it his destiny to exact vengeance on the pantheon of gods for Hectoria's sake? A dark laugh escaped his lips as he realized this might be the ultimate quest of this game. He despised being a pawn on a chessboard, but he was determined to clear this scenario no matter the price he had to pay. Suddenly Kraut approached, breaking his trance to announce the looting was complete. The knight led the prince to inspect the spoils of war, and the young man was dazzled by the mountain of wealth before him. They estimated roughly 30,000 gold, coins, a fortune far exceeding their wildest calculations. Kraut added that they had also uncovered silver bars, pushing the total value to nearly 100,000 gold coins. However, the knight noted grimly that hauling this weight with their exhausted soldiers would be a logistical nightmare. But for the prince, this was a non-issue. He had unlocked the inventory feature during the desperate battle with the goblin warlord, and was confident his subspace could hold every last crate. With a calm demeanor, he ordered Kraut to stockpile the treasure in a single location. Moments later, with the loot stacked high, the prince instructed his ally to ready the troops for the march, back to base. "But my liege, what of the crates? How shall we transport them?" Kraut asked, confused. The prince paused. These NPCs had no knowledge of the game system. They would never comprehend the concept of a dimensional inventory. However, as their leader, he didn't need to explain the mechanics, he just needed a plausible lie. "While you were moving the boxes, I discovered this enchanted bracelet. I will use its spatial magic to store the treasure." His ally was visibly awestruck by the revelation. "Keep this strictly confidential," the prince commanded. Kraut bowed deeply. "Such a legendary artifact must be guarded." "I will. Stand sentry while you secure the cargo, my lord." As the knight turned his back, the prince activated his interface and opened the inventory. Just like a classic RPG, he began sweeping the items into his virtual storage. Unsure of the slot limit, he tested the DOP capacity cautiously. To his delight, the system absorbed the entire hoard without a glitch. Now he wouldn't have to worry about funding his army for a very long time. It was time to return home. Exiting the treasure chamber, he regrouped with his formation. Kraut reported that the men were mobilized for departure. "Has Laya not returned to the ranks yet?" the prince asked sharply. "No, my lord. I fear the coward has fled." However, just then, Kaix stepped forward to intervene. The retreat of the Bigfoots was no mere accident. General Kraut finally grasped the truth. Laya had moved in silence, orchestrating everything from the shadows. When Prince Kaix unveiled the suicidal nature of her secret mission, Kraut's blood ran cold. He immediately voiced his opposition, sensing the shadow of death looming over them. Even though he held no affection for the woman, watching a comrade perish in vain was against his knightly code. Kaix explained his predicament with a heavy sigh. He had sought the general's aid only to be rejected. Thus, he was forced to walk this treacherous path alone. At the time, Kraut had dismissed the plan as absolute madness, but standing here now, he realized the fool was actually himself. The prince's eyes narrowed. Laya's silence was deafening. It was a clear omen that chaos had erupted behind enemy lines. "This victory exists only because of her sacrifice." His voice boomed. "I will not abandon an ally. Who stands with me?" The soldiers froze, stunned by the sudden decree. Yet the command of their lord was absolute law. To refuse was treason against their very souls. A roar of affirmation shook the air. Kaix blinked, surprised by their burning fighting spirit. He had an army ready to march into hell. Shame washed over General Kraut. He had failed his lord once. Gripping his sword, he swore to redeem his honor as a true knight of the realm. The prince wasted no time. "General, assemble the elite vanguard. The weak would remain behind." This was a mission for the strong. Inside his mind, gears turned rapidly. Kaix analyzed every variable, simulating the worst-case scenarios. Had she fallen to the beasts, or was she taken by the organization? No. The shadows she worked for were still blind to this operation. His pursuers remained in the dark. That variable could be eliminated. It had to be the monsters. Laya was a master of stealth. She wouldn't make a rookie mistake that would expose the entire plan. The real challenge was locating a needle in a haystack of death. Kraut stepped forward, his face grim. "My lord, where does the hunt begin?" "We go for the throat. The Bigfoot chieftain." Kaix tossed a bundle of herbs to the general. "Extract the oil. Coat every blade. We need poison damage." His eyes burned with intensity. "Ask nothing. Just obey. He would tear down the mountains themselves to retrieve her. Time passed in a blur of tension. Finally, the maw of the beast's lair loomed before them. Kaix analyzed the dungeon layout. The males are out hunting. Only the females remain to guard the nest. We purge the nest first. His voice was cold steel. Eliminate the guards. Then we track the blood trail to Laya. A cruel smirk touched his lips. This won't be a struggle like before. With the toxin on our steel, death is guaranteed. They didn't bother with stealth. The soldiers marched in like a storm. Screeches echoed from the darkness as the beasts sensed the intruders. The horde was gathering. They're coming, Kaix roared, unsheathing his weapon. Advance, slaughter them all. While the battle raged, Kaix and Thomas broke away from the formation. She wasn't dead. Not her. She was merely biding her time in the shadows. It was only a matter of time before they reunited. Eyes glued to the ground, they traced the faint disturbances in the dirt. Thomas broke the silence with a grin. You know Lady Laya is quite the beauty. He nudged the prince. Does our lord perhaps harbor feelings? Kaix scowled, veins popping on his forehead. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped. This is strictly business. Do not mistake duty for romance. Unfazed by the outburst, Thomas shrugged. Still, it's shocking. Who would have thought she'd volunteer for a suicide mission? She isn't a hero. She's a survivor. Kaix's expression darkened. She calculated that sticking with me offers the highest probability of living. Desperation breeds strange alliances. Internally, Kaix's mind drifted to the future timeline. The first continental event was approaching, the invasion of the Jabiru Kingdom. A cataclysmic war. And the mountain rangers were the key pieces on this chessboard. He had assumed they were mere militia. But the stench of conspiracy was in the air. Viscount Servios. That snake was definitely pulling the strings. Back in the main cavern, it was a massacre. General Kraut and his men cut through the beast horde like a scythe through wheat. Do not sheathe your blades, Kraut bellowed. We move to the prince now. With blood still dripping from their armor, they charged forward. Kraut's admiration for his young lord had reached new heights. He prayed to the gods of war that the prince and the girl were still amongst the living. Deep in the forest, Kaix froze. A chill pierced his heart. There she was, collapsed with wild beasts circling like vultures. Hold them back. Thomas lunged, intercepting the monsters with a flurry of strikes. Kaix dashed to her side, sliding through the dirt. The wound was catastrophic. With trembling hands, he materialized an item from his inventory, an intermediate healing potion. Please, work. A faint breath escaped her lips. She was clinging to life by a thread. Drink, he urged. Every drop of the elixir was needed to knit her flesh back together. The last beast fell to Thomas's blade. Help me prop her up, Kaix commanded. Together they supported her limp form. The golden liquid poured down her throat. A soft glow enveloped her body. Kaix exhaled, the crushing weight finally lifting from his chest. Heavy footsteps announced Kraut's arrival. The cavalry had made it. Just in time, General Kaix muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. 1 week later, the training grounds of Count Sheckchen echoed with the sound of exertion. Kaix was pushing his body past its absolute limit. His status window flickered. Level 18. He had matched the strength of a grown warrior. For a 15-year-old boy, this was a monstrous evolution. Years old. Watching him, Russell remarked on the young master's terrifying growth rate. His stamina had skyrocketed in a mere blink of an eye. Kraut stared in awe at the robust physique before him. The prince was like a completely different species now. Kraut suspected he was using a secret cultivation method to force such an evolution. But for Kaix, his road to absolute power was only just beginning. He was a sleeping dragon not to be underestimated. Kraut was burning to start swordsmanship drills. But Russell held him back. The vessel had to be fully forged before it could hold the blade. At the end of the hellish session, the prince dropped a bombshell. He had urgent business at the magic tower. His loyal knight, Kraut, asked for the reason. Kaix merely smiled, keeping his cards close to his chest. Essential preparations were underway at the tower's branch. You have placed your absolute faith in him, Russell observed. Kraut nodded, his face solemn. I do not pretend to grasp his grand design. But one truth remains. My liege's talent defies the laws of nature. It is impossible to predict what god-tier skill he will awaken next. Furthermore, his heart beats for his subordinates and his people. I can harbor no doubts about his honor. In the beginning, my mission was simply to guard a child, Russell confessed, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. But now I am chasing a shadow I can barely comprehend. Yet even a prodigy needs a guide. Your wisdom is still the anchor he needs, Kraut affirmed. The old advisor knew the reality. The young master was only 15, a ruler without a crown. He could not claim the succession until he reached adulthood and a level of power befitting a lord. When the previous count fell, I feared the darkness that would swallow our county, the soldier continued. But that fear has turned to pride. A king has been born. The prince is a lion, a true heir to his father's blood. Moments later, at the Sheckchen territory's magic tower branch, the prince and his knight were met by the branch manager. The woman paused, analyzing the duo. A boy with delicate noble features, flanked by a rugged warrior. Confusion melted into a charming smile. Handsome men are my weakness, she purred, ushering them inside. Her aura was far more playful than Kaix had anticipated from a high-ranking mage. Seated in the VIP room, she brewed tea with a mere flick of her mana. Steam rose in elegant spirals. Kaix narrowed his eyes at the display. To control mana with such finesse. Was he truly in the presence of a fifth-class mage in this backwater branch? The mage introduced herself as Roseanne, Dreamwalker. Catching his intense stare, she chuckled. Why the shock, little lord? Honestly, I never expected to find a diamond in the rough out here. Your mana control has a unique elegance, Kaix replied smoothly. Beside him, Kraut misunderstood the tension, wondering if this enchantress was the young master's type. However, the prince's gaze was purely analytical. Reaching the fifth circle before age 20 was the realm of monsters reserved for the direct disciples of the Tower Master. Roseanne beamed at the praise. You flatter me. Despite my youthful glow, I am already past 30. But being compared to the Master's elite, that is high praise. Feigning innocence, the prince pressed on. Impossible. What is your secret divine technique? Good sleep. And splashing water on my face, she teased, with a divine jerza, mysterious glint in her eyes. Suddenly, the playful atmosphere vanished. Roseanne's voice turned to steel. Now, what is the real reason for your visit? Kraut tensed at the shift. The games were over. Without missing a beat, the prince declared, I am here to purchase an explosion scroll. Roseanne's mask cracked for a split second, but she quickly recovered. I see. A dangerous customer indeed. Roseanne explained the standard astronomical price for such a rare item. However, she smirked, since you have charmed me, I will offer a special discount. 500 gold coins. Kaix raised a brow, feigning concern. Will you not face the tower's wrath for such charity? Roseanne waved her hand dismissively. This tower may be crumbling, but my word here is absolute law. Seeing an opening, Kaix played his ace card. Then I have another request. A loan from your reserve fund. The proposal caught Roseanne off guard. And how much does the little lord require? 60,000 gold coins, Kaix answered, his voice steady as a rock. Roseanne reeled at the figure. But Kaix slammed silver bars onto the table as collateral. He promised high interest, assuring her that, while short-term this deal would be massively profitable for her branch. Internally, Kaix was calculating every move. He couldn't spend the coins he had looted from Gerard's secret vault yet. That would expose his entire scheme. This loan was the perfect money laundering operation. It was the only way to legitimize his wealth. He needed Roseanne to bite the hook. But the mage hesitated, the silence stretching like a taut wire. For a heartbeat, Kaix feared he had overplayed his hand. Roseanne sighed, her expression darkening. This amount. Even with my authority, the supervisors will reject it. However, the mage offered a dangerous alternative. The eyes of the central tower rarely fall upon us, she whispered, her voice dripping with conspiracy. If we swear a blood oath of silence, I can authorize the funds immediately. She laid out her ruthless terms. Beyond absolute secrecy, Kaix would be forced to repay the entire principal within 6 months. Failure meant the silver bars, his only collateral, would be seized to liquidate the debt. Under these cutthroat conditions, the deal was struck. A predator's grin formed in the shadows of Kaix's mind. The trap was set. He knew that mages were eternal slaves to their research costs, and the interest on 60,000 gold coins was a forbidden fruit. Roseanne could not resist tasting. I am humbled by your generosity and accept your terms, he announced, playing the part of the desperate borrower to perfection. With the contract forged in shadow, the crushing debt to Gerard was effectively erased. Meanwhile, far from the tower, Gerard's killing intent saturated the air as he demanded a map. His aura was suffocating, ignited by the report that his patrol, the one guarding the secret vault, had vanished without a trace. Scouring the terrain, he pinpointed the squad's last known location. The standard mountain pass would cost them a day they didn't have. But a direct march through the wilderness could cut that time to under 24 hours. This calculation only fueled his burning wrath. Gear up, we march on the gored highlands this instant, he roared like a tyrant, but their forced march was cut short. A titan of destruction blocked their path, a massive stone golem. Chaos erupted within the ranks. It's just a golem. Big but stupidly slow. Rain fire from a distance, one of the soldiers screamed, trying to rally the men. Convinced the giant couldn't evade them, they launched a coordinated assault. But they were dead wrong. This was no mindless statue. It moved with the speed of a demon, and the vanguard didn't stand a ghost of a chance. Knights were cleaved in two like wet paper. It's over, a soldier whimpered, despair crushing his heart. All going to die here. His nightmare became reality a split second later. The golem spun, and with a single earth-shattering impact reduced him to a mist of blood and bone. A comrade nearby stood frozen, his mind, unable to process the carnage before him. Hold the line, maintain formation, an officer bellowed from the rear. In a cruel twist of fate, the man trying to command the chaos became the monster's next victim. One devastating smash silenced his orders forever. The lower-ranking troops watched in horror as their elite commanders were systematically deleted. Morale shattered instantly, and soon, the slaughter was absolute all, while Gerard watched with cold, disinterested eyes. This golem's power was unnatural. The squad's battle mage confirmed the worst. This is no wild beast. A puppet master is nearby, controlling it manually. To animate a construct of this magnitude, we are facing at least a fifth circle archmage. Terror rippled through the ranks. Facing this one-sided massacre, the commander pleaded with Gerard. We are being wiped out. We must retreat and regroup. Gerard, however, sneered at the suggestion. Retreat. Don't make me laugh. The tribute for the Marquis leaves in 3 days. Clear this trash in 24 hours. I don't care if I have to pile up your corpses to make a road. Back in the safety of the magic tower, Kaix checked the time. By now, my little gift should have been delivered, he mused. Roseanne tilted her head, intrigued. A gift for a secret lover. Not exactly, Kaix deflected smoothly. Who knows? Perhaps fate will bring a gift your way soon enough, she teased, a playful light dancing in her eyes. Neither suspected that just beyond the door Laya was eavesdropping on every word. A spike of jealousy pierced her chest. Was that sorceress trying to sink her claws into the prince? Moments later, Kraut interrupted to report that their supplies were safely secured within the tower's vault. Laya watched the interaction, her face dark with suppressed envy. The prince nodded his thanks. Then, retrieving a small ornate box, Kaix signaled for his party to give them privacy. They retreated immediately. The moment the door clicked shut, Laya exploded. Why is the prince fawning over that witch? Kraut, ever the professional, merely stated that his orders were to remain silent on matters beyond his pay grade. Inside the chamber, Roseanne lifted the lid, and her breath hitched at the sight of a magnificent necklace. Is this treasure truly for me? She stammered, completely enchanted. Kaix explained it was merely a token of appreciation for the swift funding. Roseanne quickly composed herself, reminding him of their blood oath regarding the off-the-books transaction. But Kaix saw through her act instantly. The secrecy wasn't for his protection. It was because she intended to pocket the interest payments herself, cutting out the central tower entirely. Regardless, he swore to keep her corruption hidden. Visibly relieved, Roseanne beamed, noting that doing business with him was a pleasure, especially since his visit had cleared out their inventory of scrolls. Speaking of which, she asked, eyeing his purchase, are you planning to level a city with that many explosion scrolls? Kaix noticed the greed. Her intuition was terrifyingly sharp. It was no mystery why she ruled as the branch chief. She could peel back secrets with a glance. But he countered with a perfect poker face. Absurd. I am merely restocking my arsenal. The last excavation drained my explosive reserves completely. You burn through kingdom-toppling scrolls just to dig in the dirt, Roseanne scoffed, unconvinced. Kaix offered only a cryptic smile. Let us save that mystery for our next encounter. We have a future together after all. I shall count the seconds, she murmured. Stepping out of the tower, the prince finally exhaled. The suffocating weight of the territory's debt had vanished into the wind. Now the real game began. He imagined the look on Gerard's face when he found the vault barren. Kaix remembered his past life. Under Silvio's shadow, he had been nothing but trash by the roadside. But their blade had missed its mark. Now the prey had become the predator. He would hunt them down, and Gerard was the first offering on the altar of vengeance. Miles away, Gerard's forces clashed with a nightmare in stone. Chains screamed as they tried to bind the Colossus. They needed to shatter the core. It was a suicide mission, but the only path to victory. A soldier struck true, mana erupted in a blinding flash, shattering the golem's heart. But victory demanded blood. The explosion consumed his own men in the process, a sacrifice Gerard ignored. The path is clear, though our ranks are decimated, the captain reported. Gerard didn't even blink at the carnage. "Open the vault," he commanded, his voice devoid of mercy. A mage stepped up, trembling, offering the crystal key, but the ancient gate rejected their offering. A mechanical voice thundered like a judgment from the heavens. "Intruder alert. Security protocol Omega engaged. Withdraw or face immediate annihilation." Panic flared in Gerard's eyes. He tried again, desperate, but the red lights of denial only mocked him. "Master, the mana is destabilizing. We must retreat," the mage screamed, terror gripping his heart. They scrambled back, but the dungeon was not done with them. Extermination units deployed. Meanwhile, on the carriage ride home, Kaix noticed the storm clouds gathering over Laya's expression. She finally snapped. It was the way he looked at that tower mage. Too charming. Too close. The prince sighed, realizing the misunderstanding. "My eyes were on the gold Laya, not the girl. It was purely a transaction of power." Then his gaze darkened as he shifted the chessboard of his mind. "Tell me," Kaix murmured. "What happens when a dog bites its master? What if Silvio is betrayed?" Laya frowned. "Impossible. The Viscount demands absolute perfection. Failure is a death sentence." "Precisely," Kaix grinned sharply. "So do you think a snake like Gerard will just lie down and die?" Realization dawned on her. No. If he knows he is doomed, he will tear down everything to survive. He would sell his own soul to escape the Viscount's wrath. "Exactly. The rat will bite back," the prince confirmed. Laya watched him, a chill running down her spine. He was weaving a web she couldn't see. That familiar cold distance settled between them again. Back on the Golden Plateau, the report was grim. The monsters were dead, but so was the army. Gerard's face twisted in fury. Replacements can be bought. The vault is all that matters. Subtlety was no longer an option. "Blast it open," he roared. "Use the siege scrolls." He didn't care if the ruins crumbled. He needed that treasure. A moment later, the barrier shattered. Smoke cleared. The gate lay in ruins. But as Gerard stepped into the darkness, dread coiled in his gut. They reached the heart of the sanctuary. It should have been a mountain of gold. It was empty. "Find it, tear this place apart," he shrieked. But there was no gold, only parchment. A soldier grabbed a scroll, realizing too late the sigil glowing upon it. Explosive runes. One spark triggered hell. A chain reaction of mana annihilated the remaining shadow squad in an instant. Gerard watched the ceiling crumble. It was a trap. A deliberate, malicious grave dug just for him. The mission was a failure. The Viscount would have his head. Unless... Terror replaced by a sinister resolve. "Activate the contingency," he whispered. He turned to his loyal mage with a smile. "Thank you for your service." Then he drove his blade through the man's heart. By the soldier's blade. "Fate is cruel, isn't it?" Gerard stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "It was merely your bad luck to guard, a secret that must never see the light. I had no choice." The deed was done, but a subordinate whispered a warning. Cape would not stay silent. That man had instincts like a bloodhound. He was likely already sniffing around the ruins. Gerard sneered, dismissing the murder as nothing more than collateral damage. "Focus on the contingency plan," he ordered. "We see this through to the bitter end." Sometime later, within Viscount Selvio's domain, Gerard stood before his master. The report had arrived, the treasure was gone, the weight of failure crushed down on him. Gerard collapsed to the floor, his forehead touching the ground in desperate supplication. "Spare me your pathetic groveling," Selvio's voice cut like a knife. "I care only for results. Where is my silver?" Gerard scrambled for a lie, pinning the blame on tomb raiders. "Rats. They burrowed a tunnel beneath the ancient ruins, but they were careless fools," he lied smoothly. "They triggered the ancient traps, barely escaping with their lives, leaving the bulk of the horde behind." He argued that navigating those suffocating tunnels with heavy chests was a feat impossible for common thieves. To track them down, Gerard claimed he had already baited the trap, offering bounties to the black market dealers, while his other agents closed the net. "It is only a matter of time," he vowed, feigning absolute confidence. "The treasure will return to your hands. Greed is a sickness," he continued. "They will return for the rest, and my blade will be waiting in the dark. A thief who succeeds once becomes arrogant." The Viscount's expression softened, and for a moment, Gerard believed his silver tongue had saved him, squeezing them until they squeal. "An excellent strategy," Selvio mused. However, the Viscount's eyes went cold. "Failure requires payment." The response was swift and brutal. Crack times, the whip sang through the air, tearing flesh. Selvio unleashed his fury, pouring out every ounce of his rage. "Do you take me for a fool?" Selvio roared. "I know of your petty rivalry with the Shadow Commander. You view him as an enemy. And now, my elite army trained for years is useless because of your incompetence." With half his forces decimated, the Viscount spat on the ground. "I care nothing for your childish squabbles, but when they threaten the grand ambition, I will step in." His decree was final. Gerard was stripped of his command over the dark forces, reduced to a puppet who could not breathe without permission. But the punishment was not over. The tribute for Marquis Antonio Selvio growled. Go to the Sheckchen territory. Seize their land deed as payment. If they cannot pay in full, bleed them dry until the debt is settled. Sell their assets. Burn their legacy. I do not care. Gerard lowered his head, cursing his wretched fate. That wealth. He had intended to pocket it for his own escape. Now he was forced to hand it over on a silver platter. Selvio's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Do not mistake this for mercy. You are not forgiven. If that stolen silver is not found. Also, pray for a quick death. Gerard nodded, terror and rage warring in his heart. As he stumbled from the chambers, a servant offered a healing elixir. Gerard downed it, greedily noticing. The servant was also nursing wounds. Drink, Gerard commanded before snapping, Where is Jacob? Jacob was. Discarded, the servant replied coldly. He was useless. But I have found a replacement. A boy from the desert wastes. Emerald eyes. Brown hair. He is a mirror image of Prince Kaix. Gerard sneered, his prejudice flaring up against the dark-skinned foreigner, but desperation forced his hand. He will do. The preparations, Gerard demanded. Ready in 3 days, the servant confirmed, though the executives are stalling. A sinister smile crept across Gerard's face. The Shadow Squad was crippled. The rest were chasing ghosts. Chaos reigned. And in chaos, Gerard saw his path to victory. This was his golden chance. Go to Count Sheckchen's estate, he hissed. Strip it bare. We need every coin for our new life. The servant hesitated, a memory surfacing the man who had single-handedly crushed their coup against Prince Kaix. Could they really outwit such a monster again? Days later, the atmosphere in the Sheckchen territory was tense. Kraut announced the arrival of the Viper. Gerard was here to collect the debt. Just as the prince predicted, Russell noted with a smirk. Kraut, you will stand by Kaix's side. Kraut worried he would be a burden, but Russell shook his head. Your presence is strength enough. Support your master. The moment arrived. Prince Kaix stepped forward to face his enemy. Gerard feigned politeness, commenting on his health. You look well. Gerard began, but Kaix's gaze was piercing. Save your breath, the prince cut in icily. I have no need for pleasantries. Cut the pleasantries. Your insolence has already drained my patience dry, so speak your business. Very well, I shall be blunt, Gerard sneered. I am here to execute an official seizure. It has been determined that this territory is drowning in debt, owing a staggering 60,000 gold coins with empty coffers. Thus, I will strip this place bare to secure the payment. And if I refuse, the prince challenged, then I shall deploy a high-ranking officer to shackle you, preventing any attempt at escape. You will be watched day and night. Kraut stepped forward, his aura flaring to defend his liege, declaring he would not tolerate such disrespect. But Gerard offered a cold warning. Violence will only dig your grave deeper. My judgment is absolute when it comes to recovering funds. Is that so? Kaix's voice dropped cold and calculating. Then surely, under the right conditions, a delay is negotiable. A smirk curled Gerard's lips. The young lord's intuition was dangerously sharp. He admitted that a deal could indeed be struck. In that split second, the prince saw right through him. Gerard wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. He was fishing for a bribe. His premature arrival to collect the debt only confirmed the theory. With his own secret coffers raided, he was frantically trying to plug the hole, gambling everything on the assumption that the territory was destitute. I have secured the necessary funds, Kaix announced, shattering Gerard's composure. The debt shall be paid in full. Impossible. How? Why the shock? You should be rejoicing. With a flourish, Kaix revealed several high-value bearer bonds from the Royal Chamber of Commerce. Gerard inspected them, verifying their legitimacy with trembling hands. His mind raced. How did a fallen prince acquire such wealth? But then, a dark thought took root. Unlike heavy gold, these bonds were featherlight. He could snatch them, flee across the border, and escape the Viscount's wrath forever. But just as greed took hold, the prince slammed a gleaming silver bar onto the table. Care to inspect this? I have 32 more pieces like it. Inside 420 boxes. Gerard's blood turned to ice. The prince wasn't just paying a debt. He was openly confessing to the heist of the century. Was he planning to? Report Gerard to Viscount Selvios. Had this boy orchestrated everything from the very start? Gerard stared in horror, wondering if he was even facing a human being. If the Viscount discovered the truth, Gerard's life was forfeit. Once rumors of the theft spread, Viscount Selvios would cut all loose ends and flee. Kaix's voice cut through the air, relentless. You will be the scapegoat for the disappearance of these bars. Now choose your fate. Betray your master and live or take responsibility for your failure and face a gruesome execution. Seeing the man crumble, the prince offered a devil's bargain. There is a third option. I will ensure your survival during the escape. Do we have a deal? Kraut watched silently, trying to fathom his master's grand strategy. Leaving the territory isn't enough, Gerard stammered, terror choking his voice. I will provide protection so absolute that no assassin can touch you. But why? Why go this far for me? Because I am waging war against the first titans of this kingdom. I need security that surpasses even that of royalty. Can you provide that? I can, Kaix confirmed, his eyes gleaming. But everything has a price. He slid a document toward Gerard, offering him safe passage. It was a receipt proving that Sheckchen County had cleared its entire debt using Doc's side of lies, royal bearer bonds. The realization hit Gerard like a physical blow. Prince Kaix was a monster in human skin. He had played them all for fools, hiding his fangs behind a mask of incompetence. In that moment, Gerard knew one thing he must never have: this man as an enemy. With shaking hands, he signed his soul away. The frail boy was gone. In his place stood a ruler far beyond Gerard's league. What must I do? Gerard asked, bowing his head. In response, Kaix tossed the signed contract to Kraut. Prepare yourself. We depart for the capital immediately. A short time later, Gerard vanished into the night. As the pieces moved, Kaix turned to his knight. I will need assistance, he explained. The key to our victory lies with His Majesty's firstborn, Prince Gale. Kraut worried his master, was discarding his shield. But Kaix scoffed. Do not be mistaken. The plan has not changed. It has evolved. He added that they had secured a magnificent asset for a mere 60,000 gold, but the coin was irrelevant. With a mysterious glint in his eye, he concluded, You will see the full picture soon enough. Meanwhile, chaos erupted in Viscount Selvios's estate. His chief of staff burst in pale and trembling. My lord, a catastrophe. The top executives of the Mirth Trading Company have vanished. The ledgers show assets, but it's a lie. Everything has already been liquidated and sold off immediately. Another messenger crashed through the doors, gasping for air. Headquarters has fallen. Ruthless debt collectors are tearing the place apart, but the nightmare was only beginning. Reports flooded in that ancient dark forces had finally awakened. Furthermore, several instructors from the Gold Plateau Fortress were missing, joining the growing list of those found cold and lifeless. A suffocating pressure descended upon the office, choking the air. Breaking the heavy silence, Cape stepped forward. Forgive the interruption. My lord, I bring urgent news. Traitors have risen within our ranks and fled the banner in the night. The Viscount's eyes were cold as ice. Their destination? They have crossed into the Sheckchen domain, Cape confessed. 1 week ago, our security forces intercepted Gerard's unit. Yet, the underground dungeon stood empty. The rat had vanished. Border tensions with the Sheckchen territory prevented further pursuit. Silvios narrowed his eyes. Why would a fugitive run toward the lion's den? It seemed like suicide, unless it was a calculated move. A dark realization struck the Viscount. Chief of Staff Silvios barked. Dispatch a shadow unit to the Gold Plateau Fortress immediately. This mission is top secret. Verify the containment of the silver shipment. Leave no stone unturned. But my lord, the mine collapse buried everything under tons of rock. Verification is impossible. Make it possible, Silvios's aura flared. Dig with your bare hands if you must. I demand certainty. He turned to his next pawn. Gale, you are promoted to squad leader. Recall the tracking unit at once. I will not burn our spy network for a ghost who is long gone. However, the hunt continues. Watch the Aran River like a hawk. If they do not surface within 2 weeks, they remain trapped within our borders. We will crush them eventually. Now prepare my carriage. Marquis Antonio awaits. Later, within the opulent halls of the Marquis, the host poured wine with a mocking grin. Even a mastermind like you stumbles, Silvios. A minor setback, the Viscount scoffed. One hidden base compromised. Hardly a defeat, though fate has been testing me lately. Was our strike premature? No, Silvios declared, eyes gleaming with malice. Eliminating Count Kaix Sheckchen was necessary. He was approaching the 7th class of power. A warrior of that caliber threatening the king's balance. Unacceptable. The die is cast. However, the royal agents are sniffing around for the missing silver. And the Sheckchen problem. Antonio swirled his glass. Do we march to war or play the political game? Diplomacy is the blade we shall use, Silvios mused. I have analyzed their political stance. The Sheckchen seat on the Council of Nobles remains unchanged. Tigram still holds the position, and he is our ally. He is our puppet. We strike before they can cut his strings. Meanwhile, Kaix surveyed the chessboard. Viscount Silvios will not draw his sword yet, Kaix predicted. He knows of the betrayal. He suspects my hand in the escape. Yet he chooses the path of least coin. Diplomacy. How will they strike? My lord Kraut asked. Lords rarely leave their iron fortresses. Instead, they wage war with words in the capital. Proxies fight for their interests in the arena of politics. That is the battlefield of the Council of Nobles, Kraut realized. Must we dispatch our own envoy? Tigram holds the seat. But he is loyal to that woman Stella. A difficult variable. Despite the looming threat, Kraut watched his master's unwavering calm. Had the prince foreseen even this? A chilling smile graced Kaix's lips. Listen well, Kraut. Perfection is a double-edged sword. When an enemy sees no flaws, they become desperate. But show them a crack, and they will walk right into our trap. The royal capital Elsenia. 5 centuries of history. 250,000 souls. The pumping heart of the kingdom, and the throne of King Clivio Caro. The sun rose over the morning court session. Let the proceedings begin. The royal advisor stepped forward. First agenda. The succession crisis of the Sheckchen County. The king's face fell in performative grief. The loss of the count is a tragedy for the realm, but the land demands a ruler. Does the Sheckchen proxy stand among us? I am here, your majesty. Orsul Tigram took the floor, bowing deeply. Speak, the king commanded. What is the state of the north? My heart bleeds to say this. But Kaix Sheckchen, the eldest son, has seized the castle by the sword. He framed the innocent countess for murder, a vile excuse to lock her away in chains. Worse yet, he destroyed his own brother's mana flow. The king's eyes widened. Destroyed. Barbaric. I recall the boy had craft. A troubled history. Indeed, your majesty, Tigram hissed. He is mentally shattered. A madman with power is a threat to all. The king fell silent, calculating. Do not underestimate him. With 30 years of surviving, the viper's nest of courtly intrigue, the king could smell a conspiracy from miles away. He knew deep down that the sudden demise of his loyal right hand, Count Colin Sheckchen, was no accident. It was a cold-blooded assassination. And now Viscount Kellen, a puppet of the aristocratic faction, was circling like a vulture to claim the title. Paradoxically, this blatant power grab made the king feel a strange kinship with young Kaix, despite never having met the boy. The monarch reasoned that if the prince seized power by force, he must command the absolute loyalty of his territory's legion. The king mused aloud. And I refuse to believe that an army of proud knights would bow their heads to a raving lunatic. Orsul Tigrim stood frozen, crushed by the weight of the monarch's logic. That was when Marquis Antonio stepped out from the shadows. Even if the prince retains his sanity, your majesty, he has trampled upon the law by condemning a noble without a trial. Furthermore, he ruthlessly sealed the mana flow of a potential heir, crippling him for eternity. I beseech, your majesty, summon Kaix to the capital so the House of Lords may judge his mental state. The king knew the House of Lords was a den of vipers, yet he saw no choice but to agree. Prince Kaix shall be summoned. However, the probe will be conducted by the royal administration, not the Lords. The House of Lords may merely send a witness. After the council adjourned, Antonio turned to Viscount Silvio with a dark glint. Speak your mind. We face a catastrophe. The Viscount trembled. The king is actively shielding that brat. Antonio let out a low, predatory growl. It seems his majesty resents that Sheckchen County is falling under our influence. But do not mistake this for an argart, insurmountable wall, said Silvio. And how do you plan to break through? The Marquis asked. Simple. Become the king's father-in-law. Antonio recoiled in shock. You suggest I cast my daughter into the bed of a dying old man. It wasn't fatherly love that held him back, but the waste of a valuable political pawn on a fading star. Not the current king, Silvio whispered, the air turning cold. I speak of his successor. Give us 5 years and the throne will change hands. The Marquis smiled, savoring the sheer treason of the scheme. And how exactly do you plan to dethrone a god? Days later, within the iron walls of Sheckchen County, Kaix received a missive. Kraut, his loyal shadow, informed him it was a royal decree and cut straight to the chase. The prince is summoned to answer for his crimes. Crimes, Kaix scoffed. They question your sanity, my liege. You must prove your mind is intact before a jury. Kaix threw his head back and laughed. I have no reason to waste my time on their circus. Tell Russell to fabricate a flawless excuse. Prince, do you truly intend to defy a direct command? From the king, Kraut asked, sweat beading on his brow. I will not dance to their tune, Kaix declared, his aura flaring. At this moment, my enemies wait like wolves for me to leave this fortress. Stepping out now would be walking straight into their jaws and handing them victory. I do not believe they would dare strike the round prince in broad daylight, but to stop them I would have to slaughter them all. I need no shield, for I will not move an inch, Kaix stated with absolute authority. Instead, a proxy shall march on the capital to represent my will. I have the perfect candidate. The prince. Surely you refer to Gerard, Kraut asked. 2 weeks later, in the royal capital Marquis, Antonio stood before the throne, his patience wearing thin. Even after the summons, Prince Sheckchen mocks us with endless excuses instead of appearing. He is plotting something in the shadows. And what scheme could a boy conjure? The king asked, his face a mask of stone. Kaix destroyed his half-brother's Manhwa without cause. He hides from judgment because he fears punishment. And what does the Marquis suggest? Allow me to march to Sheckchen County and expose the truth personally, Antonio offered. The king granted the request. Next, the royal herald prepared to read the following item on the agenda. However, as his eyes scanned the scroll, his expression shattered into pure disbelief. The herald's voice trembled as he announced, "The next item is the betrothal of the 5th Prince Sael." Throne room erupted into chaos. Duke Autor was the first to gasp, his composure breaking instantly. The king's voice cut through the noise. "Marquis Antonio's daughter possesses both beauty and intellect. Therefore, I grant my blessing for her union with Prince Sael." Antonio bowed low. "This is an infinite honor for my bloodline." But Duke Autor roared in protest. "This breaks all tradition. The prince's bride must be chosen from the queen's inner circle." He argued passionately, "These maidens are honed by years of elite etiquette and interaction with the highest families." As the duke shouted, Antonio smirked internally. His trap had sprung perfectly, catching them all off guard. The king turned a cold, piercing gaze upon the duke. "Are you suggesting that the Marquis's daughter is inferior to the other candidates?" The king's voice boomed, crushing the silence of the court. He struck down the objection, reminding the duke that royal unions are the domain of the crown alone. It is not the place of mere nobility to interfere with the heavens. Duke Otto grit his teeth, knowing the injustice, yet paralyzed by the overwhelming weight of imperial authority. He had no power to stop this tyranny. The moralist faction stood behind the first prince, but the tide was turning against them. The 5th prince, born of the current queen's bloodline, was the chosen one. The writing was on the wall. The king intended to shatter tradition and name the 5th son his successor. It was a death sentence for the moralist faction. Their monarch had forsaken them, and the very pillars of their power began to crack and crumble into dust. But suddenly, the heavy doors burst open. The first prince strode into the lion's den, the pressure of an urgent matter beaming in his eyes. The court gasped. He had not been summoned. The king's aura flared with warning. "Leave at once, or face the consequences." But the prince stood like a mountain. "I will not retreat until your majesty hears the truth." The air turned ice cold at his defiance. The king's eyes narrowed. Was a son daring to challenge the absolute authority of his father? The prince lowered his head, denying the challenge, yet his feet remained planted. "Refusal is treason." The king thundered his patience, snapping. He made it clear he would suffer no interference in Prince Sael's wedding plans. "This is not about the engagement." The first prince's voice cut through the tension. He had no intention of meddling in his brother's affairs. Instead, he claimed to hold a revelation news of such magnitude regarding a different matter that it would shake the king and every noble present to their core. "Speak then." The king's irritation gave way to burning curiosity. What could be so urgent? The prince dropped the bombshell. "A missive has arrived from the legendary Russell Nigel, the guardian of Sheckchen County." "Why bring up the past?" The king scoffed, recognizing the name. He believed that trouble was already buried. But Duke Otto stepped forward, sensing the shift in the wind. "Loose ends remain, your majesty. This letter is the key to the truth, shrouded in darkness." He emphasized the ominous silence that had fallen over the Sheckchen territory. This correspondence wasn't just paper. It was a lifeline from a region cut off from the world. The duke turned his sharp gaze to the investigation leader. "Furthermore, Marquis Antonio leads the probe, yet he is the lord of Viscount Selvios, one of the accused." It was a blatant conflict of interest. Antonio's face twisted in offense. "Is the duke implying my honor is stained?" "I merely speak of balance," the duke parried calmly. "To appoint an involved party as judge is to invite bias and corruption. And this Viscount Russell Antonio sneered, his venom evident. He is a dog of Prince Kaix, a likely accomplice in these treasonous crimes." Silence. Duke Otto's defense was passionate, his voice ringing through the hall. "Russell Nigel is the former commander of the Blue Lions. He is an honorable swordmaster whose chivalry is known across the continent. His hatred for injustice is absolute. He bears the Royal Order of Honor. To suggest a warrior of his caliber would peddle lies is absurd." The duke played his trump card. "We are the land of knights. If we cannot trust the word of a national hero, then the very administration of this kingdom is built on sand." Do you doubt the foundation of our country? Antonio smirked, preparing a trap. Does the Duke doubt his own king's government? But the king raised a hand, silencing the snake. Enough. The Duke speaks reason. Even the monarch could not ignore the logic. Antonio shrank back, his aura diminished. I do not doubt him. With a nod, the king commanded the letter be unveiled. Read it, the king ordered. Let all hear the truth. The prince unfurled the scroll and his voice echoed through the hall. Russell's report was grim. There had been a cowardly assassination attempt on Prince Kaix's life. The culprit, Prince Gronbein. To escape the judgment of the law, the traitor had severed his own monocycle, a fate worse than death. Russell confirmed that justice had been swift and absolute executed in his name with the consent of the knights. The report was sent to the Chamber of Lords to silence any whispers of doubt regarding the purge in his county. A heavy pressure descended as a lord approached to verify the document. It was Marquis Souvenir. Known as the Sword of the Kingdom, he was the living embodiment of military might. I fought beside Russell in the Royal Guard, he grunted. I know his hand like my own. Souvenir, recognizing the mark of a true knight and ally, scanned the page. It is authentic. His declaration shattered Antonio's attempts to distort the facts. The truth stood revealed. Cold sweat broke on Antonio's brow. The walls were closing in. His grand scheme was disintegrating before his eyes. He had planned to crush the moralist faction and seat his daughter on the throne, but Souvenir's intervention had ruined everything. All eyes shifted to the first prince. His timely arrival had shattered the board. The power dynamic of the court had flipped in a single heartbeat. The first prince's forces were now locked in a death stare with Prince Seal's allies. It was a chaotic rivalry, and perhaps Antonio thought a chaos he could still exploit. But first he had to survive this meeting. I do not question the swordmaster's honor, Antonio said, his voice regaining its oily smoothness, desperately changing tactics. But Prince Gronbein's guilt rests solely on the word of an assassin. Surely it would be prudent to dig deeper. We must drag the truth into the light. Leaving the Count's throne empty is a fatal error. O'Toole thundered. Prince Kaix is merely a boy of 15, Antonio countered. Rumors say he lacks even the foundation to become a knight. He should be a swordmaster at the very least. O'Toole scoffed at the lunacy, reminding the court that Marquis Antonio himself only reached that summit at the age of 50. The bar is set high, I admit, Antonio replied, a serpent's grin curling his lips. But to inherit a legacy, the boy must at least awaken his core and ascend to a mana user. He has 3 to 4 years to prove his worth. To reach the fourth circle, O'Toole hesitated at the timeline but found comfort in the silence of their enemies. War was not on the horizon, not with the royal wedding acting as a shield against immediate chaos. Finally, the king's voice boomed through the hall. A special task force would hunt down the conspirators against Prince Kaix. If undeniable proof was found, heads would roll. However, the clock was ticking. The investigation would end the moment Kaix awakened the fourth circle. If the prince defied the odds and ascended before the inquiry closed, the case would vanish, and he would be crowned the Lord of Sheckchen. Antonio bowed, praising the king's wisdom, but his mind was already spinning a darker web. He deemed O'Toole a fool for banking on a miracle. That frail, useless boy would never reach such heights. This decree, while seemingly fair, was a death sentence in disguise. Antonio savored the thought of Otto's despair when the trap finally snapped shut. The Sheckchen bloodline had always been a dagger in his side. Now he held the hammer to shatter them completely. That night, Marquis Antonio summoned the shadows. He called upon Lanciano, deciding his network Variata was the perfect blade. Lanciano knelt, receiving orders that Viscount Selvios must remain in the dark. The Viscount has eyes everywhere, Lanciano warned, his voice trembling. He is not easily fooled, but fear was no excuse for failure. Seeing the Marquis's killing intent, he bowed his head. Unleash the Dark Knights. Keep my hands clean just like before. Understanding the gravity, Lanciano vowed to execute the plan perfectly. Meanwhile, at Prince Gale's palace, the air crackled with triumph. Gale stood before Gerard, heaping praise upon him. The moment the royalists turned their backs, you rallied the troops. This victory belongs to your genius alone, Gerard. Humbled, could barely grasp reality. He knew the true architect was Prince Kaix, the mastermind in the shadows. But he had to wear the mask of the hero, for Kaix's involvement was a secret that could destroy them all. Gale claimed to know. The score, aware of Gerard's past with the Viscount, assuming Antonio and his snakes were already coiling for a counterstrike. Gerard warned the prince. Do not underestimate their venom. A wounded beast is the most dangerous. Gale nodded solemnly. The engagement between Antonio's daughter and his half-brother stood firm, and the king's word on marriage was absolute law. Yet Gale's confidence remained unshaken. Gerard dropped his voice, warning that the enemy would likely strike at the king's life after the Router's wedding, placing a target directly on Gale's back. He tried to soften the blow, not wanting to shatter the prince's spirit. "You have escaped the abyss and become the sun itself," he said, urging him to forge ironclad bonds with his allies. But the flattery went to Gale's head. Blinded by vanity, he ignored the tactical advice. "I will claim the Sheckchen territory for my faction," he declared. Gerard conceded it wasn't a terrible move, since the prince held Russell's letter, a trump card in this political poker game, he warned, however, against showing too much generosity. "You do not waste bait on a fish that is already in the jafter net." Gale remarked that receiving the letter from Gerard implied a deep bond with the Sheckchen family. Gerard quickly corrected him. "It is a misunderstanding. My aid was merely settling an ancient debt." But looking into Gale's eyes, a chill ran down Gerard's spine. He saw a shadow of Romany, Kaix, as if the abyss itself was staring back at him. Shaking off the dread, Gale announced he would depart for Sheckchen lands, immediately ordering Gerard to draft the declaration. He claimed indifference to rejection. His mere presence would be a smoke bomb, causing his enemies to second-guess every move. Gerard, who planned to pull the prince's strings, now felt the puppet moving on its own. The true reason behind Gale's obsession with the Sheckchen territory remained a mystery. But powerless to intervene, he could only offer a silent prayer for a safe journey. Days later, deep within the Sheckchen domain, Russell cornered Prince Kaix. His eyes were cold, his demand simple. "You must ascend to Class 4. Immediately." Kaix scoffed at the urgency. He had plans to grind levels in the local dungeons, a surefire way to accumulate power. But Russell shattered that delusion instantly. "Why risk your life in ruins?" he interrupted. "I have already prepared a special method." A chill ran down the prince's spine. Before he could react, Russell seized him, dragging him toward the training grounds with an iron grip. The special method was nothing short of torture. Within the hour, even the battle-hardened soldiers watched in horror, stunned by the sheer brutality. Russell was a demon instructor who knew no mercy. Kaix felt the Reaper's scythe, with every strike his body screaming in protest. Collapsing into the dirt, he gasped for air. He had faced death before, but to die from exhaustion during a tutorial, that was a new low. Yet the sun rose on another day of hell. Russell kicked Prince Kaix awake before dawn. "Please, no more," Kaix pleaded, desperate. "My body is at its limit, it's going to break." But the instructor's expression remained stone cold. "Giving up already," Russell mocked. "Even a commoner can reach the fifth realm with enough willpower. Look at me. I am living proof." Kaix snapped back. "You're a monster. My body is tearing apart, and I'm not even using potions." He tried to appeal to logic. "We need to save the treasury. Healing elixirs cost a fortune," but Russell parried the excuse effortlessly. "The kingdom's vaults are full, precisely because of your struggles. You have rested enough, my prince. Pick up the sword." There was no room for negotiation. Duty called, and it had a loud voice. Trembling Kaix was forced to grip the wooden blade once more. It was a training weapon, but in Russell's hands it hit like a sledgehammer. Bone-deep pain throbbed through his limbs. He knew he wouldn't survive this regimen. He needed an escape plan, and he needed it now. Suddenly, a spark in the darkness, a crucial memory from the original game timeline, surfaced in his mind. He saw the face of a woman. The first prince's future golden goose. The most legendary financial genius in the entire history of the game. Kaix's mind raced. In the current timeline, she hadn't met the first prince yet. Fate was still unwritten. If he moved fast enough, he could steal the ultimate merchant away before Gale ever got his claws on her. Seizing his chance while face down in the dirt, Kaix gasped. "Wait." Russell hauled him up by the collar, eyes narrowing. "No more excuses. This better not be a trick to extend your break." Ignoring the killing intent, Kaix played his trump card. "It's about the silver bullion," he wheezed. "The bars we acquired." Russell paused. The stolen treasure was indeed a liability. "People are searching for that silver," Russell muttered. The prince smiled cunningly. "Exactly. We need a shadow broker. We need someone to wash the funds so we can spend them freely." Russell smelled a rat. It sounded like a ploy to skip training. However, the logic was undeniable. Holding dirty money was dangerous. "Is this truly urgent?" the instructor asked skeptically. Kaix didn't blink. "If we lend that silver out, the interest alone is 200,000 gold. Every day we wait, we are burning a fortune." The mention of such massive wealth broke Russell's defense. He sighed, defeated by greed. "Fine. How long do you need?" 3 months, Kaix answered instantly. "In the capital, not a day less." Russell narrowed his eyes, sensing the prince just wanted a vacation. "Agreed," Russell said, his voice dropping an octave. "But under one condition. Kraut goes with you. He will ensure you complete your daily training hell even on the road." Kaix's victory crumbled, but he had no choice. The deal was struck. The very next day, chaos erupted. Kraut rushed in, face pale. Emergency Prince Gale is marching toward Sheckchen County. The blood drained from Kaix's face. What? Why is he coming here so soon? The War of Princes has begun, Kraut stammered. A succession battle between the first and fifth princes. Gale wants this territory as his stronghold. The news hit Kaix like a physical blow. This wasn't in the walkthrough. Prepare to leave, he shouted. We move in 2 hours. 2 hours, Kraut cried. My liege, the only way is by horse, and you can't even ride. Then I'll learn in the saddle, Kaix roared, panic rising. Just get the horses, Kraut was baffled. Why run before he even arrives? Kaix couldn't explain. He couldn't tell him that anyone who played times Heroes of Destiny times knew the true horror of that name, Gale Ro Lavo Krakow. A hero rank monster. In the game, he didn't just recruit allies, he broke them. He possessed a terrifying charisma that enslaved the strong. Those who refused him, they didn't just die, they vanished. While Kraut trembled at the thought of Russell's inevitable fury, the deadline passed. Kaix didn't care. Staying meant game over. He was already running late. But as he rushed to the stables, an unexpected silhouette blocked his path. It was Laya, and she was fully geared for travel. Where do you think you're going? He asked, stunned. She smirked, adjusting her pack. Thanks to you. He froze, stunned by the scene awaiting him. Laya was already gearing up, fully prepared for a journey of her own. What are you doing? He asked, unable to hide his surprise. It is all thanks to you, Prince. The shadow's suffocating grip has finally faded. Those who hunt me have lost the trail, she murmured, her voice light with relief. And where will the wind take you now? Laya gave a weary shrug. I have not charted a course yet. I spent a lifetime dreaming of freedom. But now that I hold it in my hands, its weight is terrifying. I suppose I will follow wherever my spirit leads. The prince, however, cut her off, his strategic mind, already spinning a web of possibilities. If you are aimless, then heed my suggestion. The prince revealed that if the threads of fate aligned, he intended to journey to the Holy Empire of Granada. Her interest piqued. Laya asked if there were ancient artifacts or hidden manipulation arts suitable for a woman of her talents there. He noted her sharp suspicion, but to his surprise, Laya's expression softened. She claimed to trust his judgment, implicitly thanking him for the intel and whispering a hope that their paths would cross again. Outwardly, the prince nodded, but his inner voice was ice cold. Asterisk. We will never meet again. Asterisk. To him, logic dictated everything. Laya lacked S-rank potential, and he had already harvested every ounce of value she possessed. She was a spent resource. A final goodbye was the only logical conclusion. Yet despite his cold, calculating nature, he chose not to crush her fragile hope. As unfeeling as he tried to remain, a flicker of humanity within him quietly prayed that destiny might defy his logic and bring them together once more. After they parted ways, the prince walked the silent rows of the cemetery until he reached the resting place of Albu, the loyal soldier who had burned his own life force to shield him. Standing before the cold stone, he acknowledged that Albu's death was more glorious than any living man's honor. But a heavy guilt clawed at his chest. He had commanded that soldier with the same mechanical coldness he had just shown Laya. Then, the truth struck him like a physical blow. He had been viewing the living, breathing people around him as mere NPCs in a game. This realization shook his core. He swore a blood oath in the silence. The next time he faced Laya, he would treat her not as a pawn on his chessboard, but as a human being. Placing a solitary flower on the wood grave, he turned away. Returning to his legion, the prince's aura flared. It was time to move. 3 days later, on the Toffley Rind, edge of the Sheckchen domain, Prince Gale and his royal entourage appeared on the horizon. Russell was charged with their reception, and as the moon rose, a magnificent banquet celebrated the visitors. Gale offered thanks for the hospitality, but his eyes narrowed, pointedly noting the absence of the rightful heir. Russell bowed low, explaining that Gale's messenger had arrived only after Prince Kaix had already departed. Despite the smooth excuse, Gale sensed a disturbance in the flow, uneasy with the shadow cast over Kaix's true location. Though his curiosity burned, he kept his diplomatic mask intact, avoiding aggressive questions. He chose only to lament missing the heir. To prevent any political friction, Gale quickly added that his eagerness stemmed only from a desire to greet Prince Kaix, but meeting a warrior of Russell's caliber was a joy in itself. After the ritual exchange of pleasantries, Prince Gale dropped the facade. Viscount Countelin operates under the belief that we are allies, Gale stated, his voice dropping an octave. I intend to use that illusion. As a token of my sincerity, I personally placed your lordship's missive into the king's hands. Russell thanked the prince for the maneuver. The atmosphere then shifted instantly. Tell me, how do you know Gerard Gale's eyes bored into him? Russell parried with a question of his own. Did he not inform you? He only spoke in riddles. I want the raw truth from your lips, Gale demanded. Indignation boiled beneath his calm exterior. How dare this man treat him like a fool, unaware of his own spies' reports? Yet what truly infuriated him was the iron fortress of Russell's expression. He could not read the knight's intent. Russell began his tale. Prince Kaix was struck by illness when the royal summon arrived. We were forced to send a written response. Fate, however, was cruel, and it was not delivered as intended. Was there an ambush on the official road? Gale pressed, searching for a lie. We found that the messenger's horse had stumbled, shattering the rider's ankle. It was in that moment of desperation that the merchant Gerard materialized with an offer. He sought refuge from Servio. In exchange, he vowed to wipe clean the massive debt the Sheckchen territory owed him, and to ensure our words reached the capital, Russell concluded. I never predicted the winds would blow this way, but the letter's delivery was paramount. By the time the story ended, Gale found no cracks in the narrative. He knew Russell was a knight of high renown, but he had hoped to sense some hidden, monstrous talent. Instead, the encounter with Gerard seemed like mere luck, a convenient transaction. Everything confirmed his theory. Kaix was a weakling prince, a variable he did not need to fear. With the board set in his mind, Gale assumed his prize was within reach. In that case, Viscount Russell, does the Sheckchen territory pledge its sword to me? The question hung heavy in the air as Russell weighed his loyalty. On behalf of the Sheckchen bloodline, I formally declare our support for Prince Gale, Russell vowed, but then his eyes flashed. However, I have one condition. The sheer audacity stunned the prince. Suddenly, a memory flashed through his mind long before the journey began. Kaix had already laid out the chessboard, warning Russell of the treacherous game ahead. Aligning with Prince Sael was a dead end, given that the scheming Marquis Antonio held his leash. Yet backing the first prince without leverage was equally foolish. The only path to victory was a calculated alliance with Gale. But Kaix's order to his vassal was absolute: do not bow without extracting a price. The demand was precise. An unconditional exemption from the transit tax for any merchant guild operating within Sheckchen territory. Russell hesitated, noting their lands were currently barren of commerce, but the young master's eyes held the weight of prophecy. Kaix saw what others could not. He knew the kingdom was fractured, split down the middle between two rival powers. Even with Gale's status as the first prince, his authority crumbled at the borders of the fifth prince's domain. However, total control within his own territories was all Kaix required to set his plan in motion. The terms were set to limit the transit to 1,000 magical artifacts per year, a bitter pill Gale would be forced to swallow. Russell questioned the strategy, fearing that other territorial taxes would bleed them dry regardless of the exemption. In response, Kaix offered a single commanding look. Trust in my vision. Though the grand design remained shrouded in mist, Russell bowed to the undeniable genius of his young liege. Back in the present, as Gale demanded the proposal, a chill ran down Russell's spine. It was unfolding exactly as his master had foretold, as if Kaix had written the script of reality itself. The following day, the entourage pushed forward, but the journey took a heavy toll on the prince's frail body. Slumped in his saddle, Kaix was at his limit. Kraut tried to rally him, promising that the city of Pausnu was mere minutes away. The knight watched his master with a mix of pity and respect. Possessing a tactical mind at the tender age of 12 was a heavy burden, yet the sudden detour gnawed at Kraut. Why abandon the direct route to the capital for this border city? Kaix claimed it was a tactical maneuver to evade Gale, but the knight sensed something else. When Kraut teased him about fearing his brother, the young prince snapped back with a flash of irritation. He insisted the visit was merely rescheduled, but Kraut only smiled, finding the boy's tantrum adorable. But internally, Kaix's frustration was real. If he remained a child in their eyes, he would never control his own fate. He needed power. To survive, he had to ascend to the fourth circle, and traditional meditation would take a lifetime. His true target lay here, a dungeon holding a legendary S-rank skill, a power capable of defying the laws of this world. Such dungeons were rare death traps, and with his weak constitution, a solo raid was nothing short of suicide. He needed meat shields. He needed a party. But they had to be expendable and discreet. Pausnu, a free city teeming with hungry mercenaries, was the perfect stage to recruit his pawns without alerting the nobility. The city walls soon loomed like giants on the horizon. At the gates, a guard halted them, demanding the bureaucratic ritual of the visitor's log. Once the logistics were settled at the inn, Kaix shifted from strategist to benevolent leader. Praising his men for their endurance, he declared a night of rest and revelry was in order. With a charismatic smile, he asked for the best spot to celebrate a question that was met with a roar of approval. The soldiers were ecstatic. Kraut, however, remained the lone wolf of caution, though his protests were drowned out by the cheer. The group marched into a bustling square, the air thick with the aroma of roasted meat and the sound of clinking glasses. From the crowd, a street urchin emerged, promising them entry to the finest tavern in all of Pausnu. Intrigued by the boy's confidence, Kaix accepted the invitation, leading his men into the den of pleasure. Drinks flowed like water, courtesy of the prince. But amidst the chaos, Kraut sat like a stone statue, refusing every cup. He ignored the confused glances of his comrades, his eyes scanning for threats. Someone had to remain sober to guard the future of the family. While the men lost themselves in wine, Kaix cornered their young guide, his expression shifting to one of serious business. The boy looked confused until the prince leaned in, demanding a location far from this noise. The youth hesitated, fearing trouble, but Kaix played his hand perfectly. He wouldn't ruin his soldiers' fun. Instead, he offered a promise of wealth. A heavy pouch for a guide to a sanctuary of silence. At the flash of a gold coin, the boy's hesitation vanished. He agreed on the condition that the drunken mob stayed behind. Kaix signaled for his shadow Kraut to attend him. As they stepped out into the night, the real mission was about to begin. "How long have you survived in the chaotic streets of Pausnu?" The youth replied. He had walked these alleys for over 10 years. The prince raised an eyebrow, remarking that the boy looked far too green for such experience. Bristling with offense, the guide snapped that he was 14 years old, forcing Kaix to offer an awkward apology. Clearing his throat to shift the mood, the prince asked the real question. "Who stands at the apex of power in this city?" The guide didn't hesitate. That would be Lord Omar, the iron-fisted leader of the Steel Shield mercenaries. However, the boy added a thoughtful caveat. In truth, Omar has never clashed with the other warlords. Until blood is spilled, it is impossible to crown a true king of the underworld. Intrigued by this power balance, Kaix pressed for names. With a look of disbelief at the foreigner's ignorance, the boy recited the hierarchy: the Red Wolf, Blackwing, and Steel Shield. These were the three great mercenary groups holding the city's fate. Kaix then shifted his inquiry to the calamity of the previous autumn, the monster wave. The youth gestured to the bustling tavern. "As you can see, we survived. But the elders tremble in fear of a supermoon approaching. A precursor to disaster," the boy whispered. Kaix scoffed, radiating an air of arrogance. Adults always drown in worry. He noted that the boy, like himself, possessed a maturity beyond his years. At last, they reached a secluded building. The boy claimed it was a fine lodging, but the atmosphere screamed otherwise. Kaix knocked. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a sharp-eyed housekeeper. "We accept no guests without a reservation," she declared coldly. "State your business." Kraut stepped forward, explaining their guide had led them here. The woman's gaze snapped to the youth, her expression darkening. "Urine, you little brat, are you causing trouble again?" She apologized to the noble visitors, but her stance remained rigid. "We are closed. Leave." Suspicion radiated from the housekeeper like a freezing aura. However, Kaix was not looking at her face but at her hand. A strange glimmer caught his eye. The woman, possessing keen instincts, instantly realized his gaze was locked onto her ring. Annoyed by the rejection, Kaix turned on the boy. "You led me to a dead end. I want my coin back." Urine stood his ground, eyes burning with defiance. "I fulfilled my contract. You wanted information, not pleasure. That is why I brought you here and not to a brothel," the boy shouted. The housekeeper, humiliated by the scene, began to scold Urine fiercely. But amidst the chaos, Kaix's eyes narrowed. As he studied the child's delicate features, a lightning bolt of realization struck him. This was no street urchin. This was a girl. And not just any girl, this was Celestina Urain Agratina. The disguise was clever, but his memories did not lie. He had finally found her. The legendary shadow sorceress Celestina Urain. Though she looked nothing like the Empress of Shadows, he remembered Kaix had traveled to this city for one reason only: to secure the loyalty of the future's greatest merchant. He needed to invest in her potential before the world discovered her value. His demeanor instantly shifted. "If this place holds information," Kaix declared, his voice dropping an octave, "then the coin was well spent. I will not take it back." "Urine, get away from them!" the housekeeper shrieked. In a heartbeat, shadows moved. Armed maids materialized from the darkness. They were surrounded. Kraut stepped forward, his mana flaring. "Do you realize whose throat you are aiming those arrows at?" The housekeeper's eyes were ice. In a high-class establishment, guests who refuse to leave politely are escorted out by force. She sensed their combat prowess. These were not ordinary travelers. "Retreat now," she warned, "and the arrows will remain in their quivers." Kaix remained calm, his presence dominating the room. "Is this how you treat potential allies? Such inflexibility will lead to your ruin." He warned her that without powerful connections, she would be devoured by this city. Urine tried to speak, but the tension was too thick. A sly smile curled Kaix's lips. "Your beauty is enchanting, madam, but your wisdom pales in comparison to your young mistress." The woman froze. She knew talent when she saw it, but revealing their true identity was a death sentence. She had to be cautious. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You should already know," Kaix replied smoothly. "Now remove that ring and hand over the girl." The color drained from the woman's face. "How? How do you know about the ring?" "The royal symbol of Agratina Kaix," whispered the name, hanging heavy in the air. "By wearing it, you shout to the world that you wish to remain hidden." The housekeeper's heart stopped. The situation had escalated from a misunderstanding to a crisis. There was no doubt left in her mind. The man standing before her was Prince Kaix. Kraut roared. "Show some respect when addressing my master." Kaix raised a hand to silence him. "Her mind is a storm of questions. I will answer them all, provided we are welcomed as guests." The woman's thoughts raced. She could not surrender. The safety of everyone in the hideout hung in the balance. Only two types of people could recognize that crest: royal family members or relentless bounty hunters seeking a fortune. Sensing the stalemate, the prince turned to the disguised girl. "What is your take, Urine?" "The more tangled the knot, the simpler the cut," she replied, her voice serene and wise beyond her years. "The prince is a man of intellect. The royal crest is in every history book. He merely recalled it. However," she paused for effect, "that is merely the crest of a dead bloodline. It holds no power now." Her insight was terrifyingly sharp. "Your insight is commendable," Kaix remarked smoothly. "And the prince is sharper than rumors suggest," she countered. But the pleasantries were cut short. The housekeeper stepped in, her voice cold. She signaled her elite guards with a sharp gaze. "Stand down. Lower your weapons. We are too exposed under the open sky. Come inside. Let us speak where walls have ears but no eyes." The heavy doors of the great hall swung shut. As the governess motioned for them to sit, Kaix analyzed his surroundings. Everything was proceeding according to his calculations, yet he could feel the suffocating, killing intent radiating from that woman. "Choose your next words with extreme care," the hostess warned, her eyes narrowing like a viper's. "I have yet to decide whether you will walk out of here or be carried out in a box. Prove your worth." Kaix remained unfazed. "For starters, is this how you treat a royal guest? Basic hospitality dictates you serve tea, does it not?" the prince suggested with an arrogant smirk. Reluctantly, the governess snapped her fingers, ordering the servants to comply. As the porcelain clinked, the gears in Kaix's mind clicked into place. He accessed his memories from the timeline before, specifically from the Game Times Destiny of Heroes asterisk. In that lore, Urine was a key operative of the Children of Ardona, a shadow organization shrouded in mystery. But she was destined for far greater heights. In the original storyline, she became Prince Gale's greatest weapon, a genius merchant whose ability to amass fortune was unrivaled under the heavens. That was precisely why Kaix was here. He planned to pour his acquired funds into Urine's hands. She understood the golden rule for a merchant credibility as life itself. However, looking at her now, she was merely a fledgling. Should he wait for her to mature into the legendary merchant queen of the future? No. It would be far wiser to mold her potential himself to snatch this gem before Prince Gale could ever lay claim to her. As Kaix formulated his plan, he took a serene sip of his tea. The governess watched him like a hawk. "You are bold. Did it never cross your mind that the cup might be laced with lethal poison?" "If it were, I would have sensed it the moment it entered the room," he replied, a confident smile playing on his lips. "Now to business. I cannot move forward unless I have your absolute silence." Then Kaix dropped the bombshell that would shatter her composure. 100,000 gold coins. "That is my offer, but I need assurance that you won't take the treasury and vanish into the night." The governess was struck dumb, her jaw tightening. But piercing the silence, Urine's voice rang out. "That is a fortune we cannot afford to ignore." Urine's silence, the governess hissed. "This is not your place." On the contrary, Urine countered, rising from her seat with an air of sudden dignity. "Allow me to formally introduce myself. I am of the royal bloodline, formerly of the Agratina family of the Jaipur Union. Though now that title is dust, I am nothing more than a fugitive running from her past. Therefore, address me simply as Urine." Kaix raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. Just moments ago, she was playing the part of a scrappy street urchin, but now her aura had completely shifted to that of a ruler. Kaix quickly recalibrated his assessment. In this life, he and Urine were merely a year apart. There was no need to treat her like a child. "Being a princess is a birthright," he said coldly, "but it does not guarantee the skill to multiply gold. If you wish to partner with me, explain your strategy. How will you succeed?" "I control a vast network of exiles and shadows," she explained, eyes gleaming. "Information flows to me faster than the wind. And the core of trade is simple: buy low and sell high." Kaix cut in sharply. "You aim to penetrate the kingdom's distribution market. That is a battlefield soaked in blood, not a playground. Do not expect fair play." The established guilds have nobles in their pockets. They will blockade your supply lines and seize your goods at the borders under false pretenses. Yurine didn't flinch. High risk yields high reward. My organization is not fragile. If the front door is barred, I will smuggle through the shadows. Do not underestimate us. No, the prince interjected firmly. Everything must be above board. This venture must be strictly legal. The entire purpose is to bring these funds into the light. Yurine smirked, realizing the truth. I see. You are looking to launder dirty money. Kaix shrugged, his expression innocent. Let's call it compensation for emotional distress. He knew the excuse was flimsy, but it didn't matter. Back to the main point. I need a guarantee. What binds you to this contract? Yurine faced him squarely, a dangerous resolve in her eyes. The solution is simple, she declared. The prince shall take me as his hostage. Absolutely not, the governess roared in protest. But Yurine stood firm. It has been 10 years, governess, 10 years of wandering like ghosts. If we continue this aimless existence, our organization will rot from the inside. We will become nothing more than common thugs. But with 100,000 gold coins, I can rebuild our legacy. Her voice trembled with passion. I am willing to bet my life on this chance. She was ready to sacrifice everything to save her people. The governess wavered, moved by the girl's fiery determination. But Kaix shattered the sentimental atmosphere. I have zero interest in your tragic backstory. His voice was ice cold. The governess bristled at his arrogance, but Kaix pressed on, indifferent to their glare. Your past is irrelevant. However, if you cling to the title of princess, go back to the Jaipur Union. Here, that title is meaningless weight. Ignoring her guardian's outrage, Yurine bowed her head. He is right. Then, with eyes burning with new resolve, she made her choice. From this day forth, I abandon the name Agratina. She grabbed a dagger and sliced through her long hair. Strands of her past drifted to the floor, shocking everyone. Even after such a drastic act, she looked at Kaix with respect. She realized his coldness was calculation, not cruelty. Kaix nodded in approval. My original plan was to leave the operation entirely to you, he admitted. But you are still a fledgling. Trust must be earned, not given. Until you prove yourself capable, I will guide your every move personally. Yurine studied him, realizing something strange. You speak with such authority, she noted, yet you don't seem much older than me. How old are you truly? Kaix paused. Despite her maturity, despite her youth, she demanded respect. Kaix drew a line in the sand. He was merely the silent benefactor, while Yurine was the sword that would wield his gold. In the face of profit, age was nothing but a number. She accepted the terms but craved the blueprint of his ambition. Kaix, however, kept his cards close. The priority was to focus on the primary target. And for that, he needed intelligence. Yurine snapped her fingers, commanding the governess to unveil the city's shadows. He needed every scrap of data on the three major factions holding Posnu in a chokehold. The prince watched a fascinating transformation. The woman who had just fussed like a mother hen became a statue of ice the moment an order was issued. It was a perfect severance of public duty and private sentiment. Leading him into the sanctuary of secrets, she vowed that the answers to his desires lay within these walls. The stage was set. As the moon rose and fell, Kaix did not rest, drowning himself in a sea of scrolls and reports. By dawn, his target was clear, the hidden dungeon. But the path forward split in two. Rely on his own elite guard or contract local mercenaries. The latter carried the stench of betrayal and leaked secrets. Yet even his elite unit lacked one crucial element, a spellcaster. In this world, the union of steel and sorcery was not just strong. It was absolute. It was a power that justified any price tag. Then a diamond in the rough appeared. A sixth-class mage hiding in this very city. Kaix's interest was piqued instantly. He sought out Yurine to strategize, but the young merchant was occupied with her studies. Instead, a maid offered refreshments to bridge the wait. Over the steam of tea, Kaix's mind raced. A sixth-class mage that was power rivaling the legendary Russell himself. He thought of his own home, Sheckchen, a humble barony raised from the dirt only a generation ago. His father, Colin, a prodigy of the 7th class, had burned bright but faded too soon, falling just after ascending to Count, leaving the territory's roots shallow. Kaix clenched his fist. He was not yet the true lord. So why would a titan of magic bow to him? Doubt lingered, but there was only one way to slay it. He had to act. Suddenly, Yurine burst in, radiating energy. You summoned me, Prince. What is the next grand move? But Kaix was an anchor to her storm. He explained that before they could conquer the market, the foundation needed time to cure. 6 months, perhaps a year. He warned her to guard her heart against premature joy. As a gesture of faith, he slid a document across the table, a certificate from the mage's tower proving a deposit of 30,000 gold coins. Urine's eyes widened. The seal was real, but the math was off. Hadn't they agreed? On 100,000. Still a grin split her face. Well, this is plenty to start supporting my big bro. The prince flinched. Big bro? Listen, she winked. Anyone dropping a fortune like this on me is automatically family in my book. Get used to the title. Kaix sighed, deciding to ignore the informality. Changing the subject. You asked why I summoned you. His gaze sharpened. Does the name Edelon Beltua mean anything to you? Before she could answer, the housekeeper rushed in, her face pale. The target Edelon had been arrested. The charge. The forbidden arts of dark magic. Urine slammed her hand down, defending his honor instantly. The housekeeper nodded solemnly, but offered a grim warning about the Foft web of politics. In this merciless world, a helping hand is often met not with gratitude, but with a dagger in the back. Kaix absorbed the intel, searching his memory for Edelon Beltua, a man with a prickly soul, yes, but no villain. His resolve hardened. He turned to the housekeeper, demanding an audience with the accused mage. I will bear the weight of the consequences, he declared. The housekeeper hesitated, attempting to block his path, but she crumbled under Kaix's overwhelming pressure. She finally spoke. Beyond the north gate, in the shadow of the mountains, lay the city of the dead. There, in a lonely shack, lived Edelon, masquerading as a humble undertaker. A stubborn hermit, she explained, who had buried himself in cryptic experiments since the day he arrived. Kaix narrowed his eyes. And the nature of these experiments? She shook her head. A mage's secrets are guarded closer than their own hearts. Suddenly, Urine cut in. You're actually going there, Kaix nodded. You defended his name with fire in your eyes. So, why the hesitation now? Urine shivered. It wasn't about trust. It was survival. Just standing near Edelon drained her very life force. She grabbed his arm, begging him to reject any deal the mage offered, no matter how sweet. Kaix nodded, but his instincts screamed that she was concealing a deeper truth. But before he could pry it loose, the housekeeper announced the end of the break and led her back to her class. With his duty done, the prince's eyes turned toward a darker destination. Along with his loyal shadow, Kraut, Kaix arrived at the ominous cabin nestled within the graveyard. When they knocked, a voice echoed from within, indifferent and cold, claiming the door stood unbarred. The prince smirked. Only a monster would live so casually beyond the city walls in a land crawling with beasts and brigands. This resident had arrogance to spare. But the moment Kaix stepped across the threshold, he was crushed by a suffocating pressure, a dense malicious aura befitting a dark practitioner. He knew the legends, but feeling Edelon's power in the flesh was terrifying. The prince offered a formal greeting, yet the mage merely scoffed, feigning ignorance of the outside world. To him, a name meant nothing without power backing it up. I do not hail from a renowned lineage, and my titles are dust, Kaix replied with steel in his voice. Besides, no station of mine could compare to that of an ascended archmage. You speak in circles, Edelon snapped, his patience snapping like a twig. I have no time for child's play. Speak your business or leave. Kaix didn't flinch. He revealed his ambition, the conquest of a local dungeon, and he wished to contract the might of Edelon Beltua. You speak of the abyss within the Impelon mountain range, the mage questioned, eyes narrowing. When confirmed, a dry, mocking laugh rattled the room. It has been an age since I met such an audacious fool. Kraut's hand twitched toward his blade at the insult, but Kaix signaled him to stand down, pressing the offer and guaranteeing a fortune. Gold is useless to a corpse, Edelon spat back. If you value your breath, boy, go home before you are slaughtered. But the prince was relentless. He shifted tactics, offering to hunt down any rare artifact the mage required for his dark experiments. The words struck a nerve. Did the mage tower send you to spy on my work? He snarled, mana flaring. Kaix realized his mistake too late. Get out. Now, defeated for the moment, Kaix retreated to the mansion. Urine intercepted him, eyes curious. Did he ask for too much gold? He wouldn't even sit at the table, the prince sighed before fixing her with a sharp gaze. What is your history with Edelon from the past? She hesitated, then confessed. When the mage first arrived, she had poured funds into his research, but he never returned a single copper. Is there a contract? Kaix demanded. Urine nodded, producing the parchment. Scanning the terms, the prince saw the debt was 30 gold coins. He stared at her, stunned. How can you remain so composed? After being robbed in broad daylight, Urine bristled at his tone. But the prince cut in, claiming he could Salvage the disaster. The girl refused flatly. I will force that old man to work until he repays every last cent, Kaix sighed. That logic applied to commoners, but her debtor was a sixth-class mage, a being of immense power. Urain paled, realizing the implication her gold was gone forever. The prince clarified the harsh reality: she hadn't lent money. She had invested in potential profits. And in that game, one must accept the risk of total ruin. He added cold salt to the wound. If you had the strength to force his hand, you might recover it. But we both know you are not capable of such a feat. Urain fired back, stinging his pride. You are no stronger than the mage I watched your training. Earlier, your swordplay was pathetic. The taunt landed. The prince flinched, visibly flustered by the child's honesty. He quickly composed himself. Why let a child's words rattle him? Despite her genius intellect, Urain was still green. Believing a piece of paper could bind a sixth-class mage was proof of her innocence. In any case, he lectured, a true merchant accepts the loss when a venture fails. More importantly, they must know how to scavenge value from the wreckage. If Urain had drafted a contract, she must have recorded the subject of his research. You wouldn't throw gold at a project without knowing its nature, would you? He made his offer 50 gold coins now, in exchange for a 67% return later. Urain's eyes lit up. She accepted on one condition: she would witness the results firsthand. The deal was struck. Afterward, Urain led him to the archives, handing over every scrap of data she possessed on the mage. Just then, the governess drifted by, her voice sharp. Urain, what are you doing? Startled, the girl spilled the entire story. Harry became absolutely livid. She scolded Urain for cutting deals in the shadows. Urain tried to defend herself, claiming that Harry always found excuses to block her business ventures. But Harry wasn't listening. She dragged the girl away by the ear, promising a supplementary lesson that would last all night. The prince was left alone with Crowd In, the silent library finally able to decode the material. But as the hours passed, the prince realized that words alone would never sway the archmage. He would have to conquer the dungeon first and ask questions later. He roused Kraut from his vigil. We are leaving. Kraut blinked, asking where his liege intended to go at this hour. The prince's eyes narrowed with resolve. His plan required a blade for hire, and he would settle for nothing less than the best. Entering the mercenary district, the atmosphere shifted instantly. A noble walking among wolves. The very air grew heavy with unspoken threats. The receptionist froze, crushed by the unexpected pressure of nobility. Panic flickered in his eyes as he scrambled, stammering that he needed to fetch a superior. Moments later, a heavy presence filled the room. The protagonist's instinct screamed. This was no ordinary bureaucrat. This was a predator, a fourth circle warrior. In this backwater, finding someone with that level of aura was like finding a diamond in the mud. The guildmaster's voice rumbled. With that level of power, he could live as a king in the countryside, yet he chose this filth. Kraut's hand twitched near his weapon, sensing a hidden insult in the man's gaze. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut skin. But the guildmaster merely smirked, claiming freedom was worth more than titles. Still, shock betrayed his calm mask. Why was a royal here in the flesh? The prince's voice cut through the air like cold steel. Proxies cannot seal the pacts I require. I handle my own destiny. The guildmaster froze. This was no child standing before him, but a monster in human skin, cunning as an ancient fox. Inside the VIP chamber, the air grew heavy. State your terms, the master demanded, locking eyes with the young ruler. Kaix didn't flinch. 3 months of hell. And payment that would make a king weep in envy. 200 elites, he continued, his eyes glowing. And I demand an S-rank commander to lead the charge, nothing less. A cold sweat broke down the guild leader's back. This boy wasn't just negotiating, he was dominating the entire conversation. He obscured the danger, yet highlighted the gold. A perfect trap, woven with words presenting a high-risk gamble as a golden opportunity. The logic was flawless. The risk and reward balanced on a razor's edge, making it impossible to dismiss. To accept was suspicious, but to refuse was an insult to his pride as a mercenary. The prince had him checkmated. Trying to regain ground, the master pushed back. For a job this size, I need the target. I cannot send my men into the dark blindfolded. Kaix smiled, a predator baring teeth. Knowledge costs gold. You want the full picture, then be prepared to accept a smaller reward. The master realized the futility. This iron wall would not crack under pressure. No information would leak from this boy. With a resigned sigh, he bowed to the superior tactician. The contract was sealed. He had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. I've never seen a noble with eyes like yours, he admitted, his voice low. Just try not to lead my boys into a slaughterhouse. Bring them home. The prince nodded solemnly. Destiny will decide their fate, but I shall do everything in my power. A captain will meet you at the inn, the master grunted, standing up. Prepare for war. We will discuss the strategy then. Back on the streets, the prince's knees finally shook. Kraut caught him concern, etching his face. My liege, is something wrong? I gambled everything on that bluff. Kaix exhaled the tension, leaving his body. Thank the gods he folded before I did. Where did you learn to strangle men with words? Kraut asked, awestruck. Kaix couldn't reveal his past life, so he just smiled. Let's drink to victory, Kaix cheered, dodging the question. Juice for you, little lord, Kraut teased. You are still a child after all. But from the shadows, a pair of eyes watched the young master with lethal intent. The game was far from over. The predator licked his lips. A noble in the slums. This reeked of opportunity, and he decided to hunt. Welcome to Pozniv, the city of freedom. Here, the king's law is nothing but ash and might makes right. It is a sanctuary for sinners. Join the mercenaries of Poznu, and your bloody past vanishes like smoke in the wind. But freedom has a price. Every soul here is fuel for the meat grinder against the monster wave that crashes down annually. Every autumn, Impalin Mountain erupts. A tsunami of beasts floods the valley, hungry for flesh and destruction. It is kill or be eaten. The ultimate survival of the fittest, where the weak become food for the strong. Yet honor was not always the currency here. The first shields were criminals tossed into the jaws of death by the kingdom, expendable trash with no families to mourn them. Upon their bleached bones, this city's brutal system was built. From that blood, the Blackwing mercenaries rose. Now they hold the city's throat in an iron grip, ruling the shadows. At the peak of this dark empire sits one man, Valter, the king of the underworld and leader of the Blackwings. In his fortress, a shadow materialized. Corvus, the hooded phantom, dared to intrude upon the king's domain. You have some nerve showing that face here, Valter growled, his aura flaring with rage. Do you have a death wish? Quiet Corvus hissed, his voice like grinding stones. I have cast aside my past. As a dark knight, I demand your ear. To a warlord like Valter, patience was for the weak. His killing intent spiked, suffocating the room. He knew this rat had been taking elite contracts. How does a piece of filth reach Class 6? The thought disgusted him. Ignoring the taunt, Corvus dropped the bomb. Nobles have entered the hunting grounds, he whispered. The prey has arrived. Hidden in the city's shadows a few days prior, questioning what Valter knew about the situation. Valter feigned ignorance. In response, Corvus revealed that the nobility had just posted a suspicious request at the mercenary guild commanding Valter to unearth every dirty secret he could find. In turn, Valter demanded to know his cut. Corvus promised he would pay a heavy sum up front with a massive bonus if the intel was high grade, but he needed it. Done yesterday. Fail to accept, he warned, and Valter would be throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime. Even though the stench of trouble hung in the air, Valter ordered his subordinates to scour the underworld for information. A short while later, the dossier was compiled, but upon reading the files, Valter's eyes widened in shock, asking if this insane noble was trying to incite a full-scale war. Corvus clarified that no territorial dispute had been declared, and they didn't share borders with any hostile nations. Despite this, Valter snapped back that this was a rank A mission. Dungeons were meant to be raided by elite strike teams, not an army of 200 mercenaries. At this, Corvus agreed that no one would be foolish enough to hire a battalion for a simple dungeon dive. Valter concurred, suggesting their true goal was to massacre the nobles. Sensing the tension, Trius probes, asking if the prince has a favorite hostess here. At this, the why protagonist realizes there is no need to introduce Harry. Understanding that Trius has taken a liking to her, he smoothly replies that he sought a sanctuary away from prying eyes and simply met a girl who introduced Tim to this establishment. With that, Trius concludes that the prince harbors no ulterior motives regarding Madame Harry. Shifting gears, he asks if the prince plans to expand their forces. In his experience, there are only two fates for a rank A mission: becoming cannon fodder in an unwinnable war, or a suicide dungeon run. The prince thinks that Trius has correctly deduced he isn't preparing for war, but the mercenary must remain ignorant about the true nature of the dungeon exploration. The man knows nothing of the mission's scale or rank, yet he boldly suggests hiring more bodies. In other words, the protagonist realizes that monsters aren't the only threat. Human vultures will be circling, waiting to loot the spoils. Trius insists the prince shouldn't underestimate the danger. Although there would burn more gold to hire reinforcements, it would be worth it. If their military might is overwhelming, enemies won't dare to bare their fangs so easily. However, the protagonist coldly refuses to hire more mercenaries, stating that their adversaries won't hail from any of the three great powers. Trius realizes the prince isn't taking the gravity of the situation, seriously convinced that mere sellswords can't protect a noble from a targeted assassination. If he pushed any harder, the contract might be voided, so he decides to hold his tongue. But if the situation descends into chaos, he plans to grab Harry and Urine and flee. With that resolved, he reviews the contract details. The newly added clause demands he gather a third more manpower in addition to the supplies. Furthermore, he understands that to maintain absolute secrecy, each soldier will be responsible for a single isolated task. Therefore, he will begin the final preparations. 3 days later, in a desolate field on the city outskirts, Trius reports that per his orders a total of 260 souls have been gathered. Internally, the prince admits that, despite being so overly dramatic, Trius delivered results. But before marching, he has one final move to make. The protagonist begins to ruthlessly cut members from the mission roster. Watching this, Trius warns him, saying that rejected mercenaries are more vindictive than he realizes. The prince commands Trius to watch those who resist, noting that the loudest complainers are likely spies. Trius asks how the prince can be so certain of his judgment. He replies that a true mercenary would be thrilled to get paid, without risking their neck in battle. After all, they received half the gold up front. On the other hand, if a spy took money from a shadowy backer, they would be forced to return it if they came back without the mission intel. That is why they would desperately refuse to leave. Despite the logic, the protagonist knows it's impossible to guarantee who is a rat and who isn't. But tactically, he has significantly choked off the risk of information leaks. Now the expedition is truly ready to launch. Amidst this, Iraine approaches, asking if the prince enjoyed her gift. The protagonist acknowledges that without her intervention, he never would have detected the killing intent from one of the three great powers. The girl smiles, stating they are partners and she can't leave a vital ally to die. Thanks to Uraine's deep connections, the protagonist gained an iron shield in the form of Trius, recruited by the governess herself. Uraine warns that the beasts in the Impalan mountain range are as ferocious as the nightmares in the Golden Mountains. Kaix, declares he, feels no fear. Iraine teases him, asking how a pampered young master raised in a mansion can face death without trembling. The prince, he reveals that the specter of death haunts him even in his dreams. During the march, Trius breaks the silence, questioning if the prince intends to keep their final destination cloaked in shadows until the bitter end. He warns that this zone is a chaotic web of overlapping monster territories, and marching without direction is suicide. At the very least, he demands they send scouts to pierce the fog of war. Yet Kraut cuts him off, declaring his absolute trust in his master. He insists that Trius must learn to obey with the same blind faith. But Trius remembers the graveyards filled with mercenaries who died because of the foolish pride of nobles. He fears this mission is heading toward the same bloody fate. If their losses become critical, retreat will be their only option, and every coin invested in this expedition will vanish into nothingness. The prince ignores the complaints and orders Kraut to scale the highest tree and activate his sensory abilities. From the vantage point, Kraut detects a goblin village 500 meters out. The prince's command is instant. Wipe them from the face of the map. Kraut hesitates, warning that the thick scent of goblin blood could attract far deadlier beasts from the depths of the forest. The prince merely smirks, stating that a true knight never flees from a battle. Trius freezes in shock. Detecting a target from 500 meters should be impossible for a human. But the shock continues, as Kraut reports an orc settlement on the other side, comprising 10 distinct structures. The prince dismisses the threat level, ordering a complete massacre with 0 survivors. Kraut's detection range expands even further, spotting a null settlement 650 meters away. The prince sentences them to immediate extermination. Trius is trembling his mind, unable to process Kraut's monstrous perception stats. He cannot understand why the prince is declaring war on the entire forest. Instead of choosing the path of survival and bypassing the danger,